Chapter 392. While the banquet hall was in chaos, Team 7 had begun an internal investigation in secret. It was not hard to imagine that the Zhong family in the Westwoods knew all their whereabouts. However, the arrangement of Jian Shui'er sitting in the black car was only known to the people in the team. Even this was clearly known by Zhong Ziqi's subordinates, so there was obviously a mole. In less than 2 hours, Team 7 found a suspect, the assistant director of the concert's technical team. This assistant director had come into contact with the Zhong family at the Silan sector's Interstellar Space Inspection Station. The other party had bribed many details of the team with a large sum of money. By Magnolia used some unknown method to make this assistant director spit out all the gray income, and was then thrown on a long-range spaceship back to the capital ring. Back in S1, what awaited him was a complete loss of reputation. As for the relevant officer in the Chongfeng military base who leaked the secrets, neither Sulu nor Team 7 could do anything about it. So by Magnolia could only send the information to the Department of Defense. The legal department will definitely come up with an opinion, but the Department of Defense's voice has never been very loud in the Westwoods. By Magnolia said softly. Sulu didn't care what kind of methods the men in Group 7 used to destroy the assistant director's life, wealth and reputation. Since the assistant director had done something wrong, he must pay the price. He just thought about the people from the Zhong family he met today and vaguely understood why the Federation government had been trying to suppress the Zhong family in the Westwoods. A big family with military power far on the front line was indeed too heavy for the Federation. We will depart to 5,460 in 3 days. Although the military is in charge of the defense of the concert, everyone needs to be alert. That is the real front line. I heard that there are 70,000 Imperial Expeditionary Force hidden in the mountains of the Northern Hemisphere. Suli's heart was also heavy. He put the wet towel beside him and looked at By Magnolia. We can't let Miss Jian Shui'er get hurt. By Magnolia did not know about Jian Shui'er's secret identity, but she sensed the seriousness in Suli's voice. She nodded and said softly, the president of the Golden Star Hotel, who is also the director of the Department of Defense's office in the Westwoods, Major General Chiaoda, wants to see you. Sulu was slightly stunned. He looked at By Magnolia and immediately reacted. Madmanly had caused such a ruckus at the cocktail party, and everyone in Silan knew of his origins. Naturally, someone like the director of the Department of National Defense's office in Silan would need to explain to him what had happened earlier. Whether the rumor was true or not, at least the federal military knew that Sulu was chosen by the war god. I'm not used to dealing with this kind of thing. My current identity is just a bodyguard. Sulu shook his head and said, don't worry about the things in the Sunset State. We won't be staying in the Westwoods for long. You and Lan Xiaolong should quickly come up with a plan for the concert's security. The original plan. I think it needs to be revised. I have a feeling that this concert is not that simple. After By Magnolia left, he simply cleaned up the room and cautiously declined an invitation to have dinner with one of the generals of the 4 military regions. When he thought about how he had become a popular person in the eyes of so many people, and how these high-ranking generals had to deliberately win him over or get close to him, he could not help but feel a little strange. Just as he was about to continue to daze in the room and digest the shock of Jian Shui'er's identity, he heard a report in his earpiece. The national girl suddenly wanted to go swimming. Sulu was slightly stunned. He looked at the bright sunlight outside the window, changed into a thin black summer dress, and walked out of the room. No matter how he felt at the moment, he had to stay by Jian Shui'er's side and protect her safety. In that sunny afternoon in the hospital, he had once said to himself that he owed Jian Shui'er a life, so he was willing to take Group 7 and cross the Milky Way to the Westwoods to protect her personal safety. And from this moment on, he would no longer think about how many lives he owed her. Instead, he would use all his strength to make sure that the purple-haired girl would not suffer any harm. Because she was the uncle's only child. Standing in the quiet corridor and stepping on the soft carpet, he looked at the dark wooden door through the light of the hotel's elegant wall lamps. His eyes narrowed. At this time, should he knock on the door and enter, tell the young girl about the history of the Donglin Revolution, and then cry in her arms and play the show of recognizing her as his relative? Or should he pretend that he didn't know anything and wait to see what tricks the old man was playing? The door was pushed open and Jian Shuier, wearing a white bathrobe and accompanied by Sister Tong, walked out. She looked at Su Lu with a sweet smile and said, "Sorry to trouble you." The girl wore a dark wide-brimmed hat that hid all her purple hair. Large sunglasses covered 2/3 of her delicate face, revealing only the tip of her nose and red and lovely lips. Her bare feet shyly peeked out from under the bathrobe, like a delicate and lovely white flower that had just bloomed. Su Lu was half a head taller than her, so he naturally lowered his eyes. Through the sunglasses, he saw a touch of white on the girl's bathrobe neck. He suppressed the confusion in his heart and answered softly, "I'm not afraid of trouble." The main administrative planet of the Westwoods region was usually called the Westwoods planet. The development of this planet was tens of thousands of years later than the capital ring. From the beginning, it used clean energy. People extracted hydrogen energy from seawater and used geothermal energy efficiently. Coupled with the huge network of wind generators on the northern plateau, it completely met the basic energy needs of the West Woods. It did not experience heavy energy pollution in the early days, and did not pay a terrible environmental price like the crystal mine development in the Donglin region. Therefore, the Westwoods planet had the most famous blue sea and blue sky in the entire Federation. The curved silver beach in the Sunset State was the most beautiful and most pleasant place among the blue sea and blue sky. As the property of the Federation's military, the Venus Hotel undoubtedly occupied the best spot in Silver Beach. Furthermore, an isolated area was set up for the hotel's most distinguished guests. In the past, only officers with at least the rank of Major General could enjoy the white sea and white sand that even the tycoons could not monopolize. However, the national idol's appeal in the Federation was unparalleled. This time, her comeback concert was held in front of the Westwoods frontline soldiers, so naturally, the treatment was different. Because of the previous incident, everyone in the Department of Defense in the Westwoods knew who the national idol's security director was. Naturally, they opened the door wide and vacated the beautiful Bay Beach, forbidding anyone from entering. Countless waves of blue water of different shades moistened the eyes. In the distance, there were white seagulls flying up and down between a few light clouds, stirring up a few lively waves on the calm sea. Jian Shuier did not throw away her white bathrobe and rushed to the calm sea with a bell-like laughter like she was in the movies. She just sat quietly on the beach chair, hugging her arms tightly as if she was afraid of the cold, and slightly narrowed her eyes with a hint of sultry beauty. Sister Tong stood in the shadow of a palm tree in the distance, and Su Lu stood in the shadow of an umbrella. He wore sunglasses and a black summer suit, looking ahead with an expressionless face. But because of this situation, he remembered a certain conversation with Taizion 2 years ago at the beach. You can't pretend to be a bodyguard just by wearing sunglasses and standing there expressionlessly with your hands behind your back. Jian Shuier turned to look at him and couldn't help but laugh out loud. I also wear sunglasses. I don't think I'm a bodyguard. Su Li's cheeks were slightly hot, not because he was being teased by the girl, but because he didn't expect Jian Shuier's laughter to be so clear and bright. She didn't have the restraint of a superstar at all. What's more, the black summer suit you're wearing is Givenchy's new design. To be precise, it's something that the master left for next year. How much does it cost? Jian Shuier looked at him with a smile. Even the most powerful bodyguard in the Federation can't afford such expensive clothes. So no matter how you hide it, your small eyes, expensive clothes, and silly smile will all betray your true identity. Most of Su Li's current clothes were bought by Taizion and Li Xiaotong, who pitied him for not knowing about the world, and sent him to his apartment. Some of them were bought by Secretary Bai, who didn't know about the material of these brands. Naturally, he didn't know that this seemingly ordinary black summer dress was expensive enough to expose his identity. I heard that you don't know much about so-called fashion, Su Lu said with a smile. My real name is Jian Muzi. Without any warning, Jian Shuier took off her large sunglasses. The sea breeze caressed the girl's beautiful face and her delicate cheeks. She looked at Su Lu and said with a smile, I didn't want to lie to you that night. My parents are indeed long dead. I don't even know who they are. Muzi is Li. I was brought back to the Li family by the old man, so I'm called Jian Muzi. She smiled and added, the old man is the old man you were talking about. Su Lu was silent. The sunglasses reflected the clear blue sky and white sand, Jian Shuier narrowed her eyes. She didn't know what he was thinking. She said softly, "I hope my story won't shock you too much." Sulu slowly took off his sunglasses and looked at the girl in the chair with a smile. He vaguely understood why, when he rarely saw her, other than the joy of seeing his dream idol, he also felt a sense of familial closeness. It was because of the blood flowing in her body. "I also want to tell you a story. I hope you won't be too surprised." "What story?" Jian Shuier asked curiously. "A story about your father." Jian Shuier gradually opened her eyes. Her long eyelashes fluttered softly in the sea breeze. "Your father was my teacher. I grew up with him in Donglin." Su Li's eyes gradually narrowed. His thoughts returned to a long time ago. That decaying planet, that shabby repair shop, that mine full of stray cats, those raging bulls, that uncle with a backpack full of repair tools. "I've been writing too much for the past few days. Apart from Christmas Eve, I've always been writing at 3. Silly cat is unprecedentedly diligent. I'm not complaining about being tired, nor am I complaining because I'm really not tired at all. It's not hard at all. I've already thought of the plot. It's just that I'm a little tired of writing. It's like eating too much fat every day and wanting to vomit. I'm not pregnant, so don't worry. Last time I promised to write at 3 chapters every 8 days. Now I've only completed 6. Before the end of this month, I'll definitely write at 3 chapters every 8 days. Tonight, I'll clean up the outline and plot a little more. Then I'll clear my head and chase away all the greasy words. I'll grab some clarity from the air and stuff it back in. Tomorrow, I'll continue to be invincible." "Ugly girl invincible? Tut tut. See you all tomorrow. Lard has no intention of writing at 3 chapters every night. I'm calling everyone to vote for me after midnight, because the rankings will be updated on Monday. Again, I've only just realized that last week's rankings were really good. Also, I'm in a good mood to get these votes because they're free. Brothers and sisters, please bear with me and support me. I sincerely thank you." Chapter 393. Sulu originally wanted to say that he grew up with the uncle, but who would have thought that it would turn into such an awkward narrative? On the warship, he had once told his story to Jian Shuier while drinking red wine. However, he wasn't someone who was good at telling stories, especially since the story he was going to tell today was related to Jian Shuier. He was deeply immersed in his own life and memories, so when he looked at the shocked beautiful girl in the chair and saw her tightly clutching the edge of her bathrobe, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. How did the story begin? He could guess why the uncle abandoned his own flesh and blood, but he did not know whether he should tell her or not. Should he say that when they were in Donglin, the uncle would go to the sanatorium every week to visit prostitutes while he was in charge of paying the bill? Or should he say that when the uncle was in a good mood, he would take him to sit in the repair shop on Xianglan Avenue and admire the white and tender thighs of the policewomen in short skirts and boots through the floor-to-ceiling glass window? Let's start with the heavy repair tools behind the uncle's butt. Those seemingly simple tools such as the star-shaped screwdriver were like a string of proud wind chimes, constantly colliding with the uncle's sturdy and proud butt, producing a proud and crisp sound on the other side of the deserted mine pit and the electronic wall. Telling the uncle's story to Jian Shuier was tantamount to letting Sulu reminisce about his life in Donglin. He spoke more and more naturally and smoothly, and his slightly squinted eyes grew brighter under the sunlight. They were not tears but reminiscence and sadness. As he reminisced and narrated, Sulu understood many things. Why would the indifferent Uncle Fengyu, who appeared to have experienced many vicissitudes of life, be so fanatical and obsessed with a national girl like the most ordinary people? Why would he hold a bottle of red wine every day and stare at the Federation's Channel 23 just to watch that TV series? That was because he had left his own flesh and blood, and could not let his daughter grow up by his side. He could only silently pay attention to the little girl on the Capitol ring in this way, using it as a form of comfort and spiritual sustenance. This kind of spiritual sustenance was extremely important to Fengyu, so much so that after the Hushi Region Radio Management Committee temporarily stopped broadcasting Channel 23, the purple-haired girl's face disappeared from the TV screen. The uncle angrily ordered him to incite the orphan gang on Clock Tower Street to demonstrate. As one of the most wanted criminals in the Federation, this kind of action was obviously not in line with his cautious style as he moved through the glory of the charter, But it was in line with the anger of a father. The sea breeze blew gently, but it could not blow away the dry heat and stifling atmosphere under the parasol. During Su Li's narration, Jian Shui'er listened in silence. After the initial shock, her expression returned to that of a young girl's tranquility, as if the person Su Lu was describing had nothing to do with her. She didn't even ask any questions. "Uncle. He had his own reasons for leaving you." Su Lu rubbed the frame of his sunglasses. He felt a little sad because of the girl's unusual silence. After some thought, he said in a low voice, "He has always been wanted by the Federation, so he couldn't have been with you as you grew up. When you were in Eastwood, he was actually always silently watching you. Although he never said it, I know he must have missed you a lot." Jian Shui'er sat in the chair without moving. She had maintained this posture for too long, causing the back of her neck to feel a little numb. She suddenly took a deep breath and asked with a sweet smile, "Last time you told me that you escaped from Eastwood. You also said that you had an uncle who was killed, and that you couldn't take revenge. The uncle you were talking about, is it the one you are talking about right now?" The storytelling took a long time, and it was already dusk. The shadows under the parasol swayed slightly. The surface of the sea was quiet. Su Lu dared to look at the smile on her face and the cute dimples on her cheeks. He forced himself to raise his head and look into the distance with some confusion. However, his eyes were narrowed by the scorching sun that was gradually moving toward the horizon. A girl who had lost her parents when she was young suddenly found out that in the past years, her father had lived on some declining planet in the universe. However, before she had the chance to be pleasantly surprised, she was forced to accept the fact that the father she had never met had long since died. What a cruel plot this was. After a long silence, he opened his mouth with some difficulty and admitted, "Yes." Jian Shui'er didn't cry. She only furrowed her brows in an extremely pretty manner. She propped up her chin and looked at the sea that was rippling with thousands of golden threads. She was incomparably peaceful, and there was even a hint of a warm smile on her face. It was as if she was thinking about some profound but also very interesting philosophical question. After a long time, she opened her eyes wide, blinked her eyelashes, and asked curiously, "Why is he wanted by the Federation? The old man never told me these things. He only said that he had died a long time ago." Su Lu replied, "Your father is the #1 target of the Bureau of Proclamation." He didn't know how much makeup had been applied on the history of the past or how many black clothes had been worn, but he didn't want to use things that he didn't know to explain anything for the uncle. This was the effect of the same pride in the different temperaments of the master and disciple in the mine. A very simple explanation was better than thousands of explanations. The glory of the charter had never made a mistake. Jian Shui'er hugged her shoulders tightly, somewhat at a loss, and then smiled slightly with unknown emotions. A moment later, she turned around and pursed her lips proudly. She raised her head to look at Su Lu behind the chair, who was using his distant eyes to hide the emotions in his heart. She asked, "It seems that the old man wanted you to come with me to the Westwoods because he wanted to tell me this through your mouth. The Federation's god of war, Li Pifu, was the most dazzling star in the universe. He was revered and worshipped by countless people. Even the royal family of the empire, who wanted nothing more than to eat his flesh alive, would always have a trace of reverence when they mentioned him, in addition to hatred. There were probably only 2 people in the universe who dared to call him old man. The time when Su Lu had blurted it out in Qingqing prison didn't count. The only people who dared to call Li Pifu that way happened to be a father and daughter pair. Things like blood ties were really wonderful. However, when Feng Yu mentioned his biological brother, he used the 3 words old man to express some kind of disdain and ridicule. Jian Shui'er called him that, but it represented Li Pifu's unparalleled love for her, and her affection for this old man. That might be one of the reasons, Su Lu replied. Jian Shui'er didn't ask any more questions. She turned her head and squinted her eyes to look at the sea. Her beautiful and petite face was filled with faint loneliness and sorrow. She was the most adorable and well-liked national girl, but this didn't mean that she wasn't intelligent. In fact, the people from the Li family were either demons or monsters, or elves that had fallen into the human world. Therefore, she didn't angrily ask the Li family why they watched as her father was wanted, wandered, and died. She also didn't painfully grab Su Li's clothes and ask him to explain that her father wasn't a bad person, but rather someone who had been framed. This kind of plot was a drama, not real life. Thank you for telling me everything about my father. From your story I can roughly imagine what kind of person he was. Jian Shui stood up from the chair and gently untied the belt of her bathrobe. She said softly, in my imagination, his life must be a mess. You were so young back then and you had to take care of him. I really can't imagine. Jian Shui took off her bathrobe, turned her head, and looked at Su Lu with an extremely serious expression. She was wearing a dark blue swimsuit. It was a conservative one-piece swimsuit, but the close-fitting material exposed the girl's youthful and attractive curves. I'll give you a hug. She walked forward and gently hugged Su Lu. Her tone was playful but extremely sincere. Thank you for taking care of him for me and Donglin for so many years. Feeling the warmth from his arms and smelling the faint orchid scent in his arms, Su Li's body stiffened slightly. His emotions were slightly disturbed, but he didn't have any distracting thoughts. He only felt a trace of sadness as he thought of the days when he cooked for his uncle every day and paid for his prostitutes. Jian Shui left his embrace and laughed cheerfully as she ran towards the golden sea. The unpainted waves just now couldn't stop her. Her laughter was so clear on the quiet beach, like a round crystal that had been washed by the sea for hundreds of millions of years. Su Lu knew why Jian Shui could laugh so happily after hearing the story, but he liked to hear her laugh. They had been together for a long time, and the idol of his dreams was by his side, showing the truest side of her life. The girl's optimistic, cute, simple and straightforward personality was like a magnet, deeply attracting him. Telling a girl the story of her dead father was a very difficult job. Coupled with the sincere hug from Jian Shui earlier, Su Lu felt a little hot and tired. He unbuttoned his black summer clothes and sat on the chair. He opened a bottle of water and slowly drank from it, but his gaze was always cautiously on the beach. Jian Shui, who was wearing a dark blue swimsuit, had already plunged into the sea like a nimble fish. At this time the sea was like a piece of raw ore. The surface of the sea was strands of gold, but under the surface was a peaceful and soft blue. The young girl moved stealthily in the sea of blue. Her purple hair had long been swept up by the ripples of the water. She looked like an elf wearing a princess crown woven from water plants. Her slender legs were extremely tight, and from time to time they would bounce, shining a fresh and attractive white in the sea of blue, like a naughty mermaid's tail. She was very good at swimming, and her movements were extremely natural as she moved stealthily in the sea. Sometimes she would dive into the white water at the bottom of the sea to pick up a shell, and sometimes she would reach into the quiet sea to touch the bold thorned fish. The blue was peaceful, and there was no worldly matter, no noise that would disturb her heart and her emotions. She laughed silently in the dark blue sea. Her incomparably beautiful face carried undisguised happiness. However, small droplets of water slipped out of her eyes from time to time and slowly rose to the surface of the sea. Under the illumination of the twilight that penetrated the sea, they were like pearls that kept pouring out. In ancient fairy tales, the tears of a mermaid could not be seen because they mixed with the seawater when they flowed out. However, the tears that flowed out of her smile were so clear in this blue sea. Chapter 394. Ever since the story at the seaside, the relationship between Su Lu and Jian Shui had changed imperceptibly. The awkwardness that hadn't been completely eliminated at the red wine night had long been blown away by the sea breeze. The innate closeness between the two gradually became a kind of reality. Because of the dead middle-aged man, they had a sense of family. There was no need to talk about the subtle feelings between a young man and a young woman. Su Lu naturally regarded the former idol of his dreams as a sister who needed to be protected and loved the most. In the corner of the luxurious penthouse suite, there was a private space of about 80 square meters. The colorful optical fibers in the glass interlayer formed an abstract and incomprehensible picture, making the people sitting in the living room completely unable to see the content inside. Su Lu, Jian Shui shouted from behind the colorful picture glass wall. Are you coming with me to the press conference in the afternoon? Yes, Su Lu replied. Can you help me take a look at my outfit? Jian Shui poked her head out from behind the glass wall and waved at him with a giggle. Didn't you say that I have no taste last time? Sulu scratched his head and walked over obediently. Looking behind the glass wall at the national girl who was looking left and right in front of the mirror, he thought that there were several designers and stylists in the performance team. How could he see anything? Standing in the living room, Sister Tong, who was confirming the itinerary, slowly put down the phone in her hand, and a strange expression appeared on her face. Behind her stood two female assistants who had been with Jian Shuier for 6 years. Their expressions were extremely dull. Thinking of the night on the warship and the bits and pieces of the past 2 days, their hearts couldn't help but beat faster. After swimming at the seaside, Sister Tong keenly noticed that the relationship between the Miss and Sulu had undergone some subtle changes. It was not necessarily in terms of feelings, but it was unusually shocking. When Jian Shuier went to the capital alone to shoot a TV series at the age of 12, she was sent by the Ministry of Defense to protect her. This was the first time she saw the Miss treat a member of the opposite sex so unguarded. In the past 2 days, although Jian Shuier and Sulu did not have many opportunities to be alone together, the details of their actions and the strangeness in their tone were still noticed by many people in the team, such as at this very moment. Jian Shuier looked at Sulu in the mirror and couldn't help but squint her eyes and laugh at him. Why are you blushing? The outfit she had prepared today was a scarlet female imitation vest paired with a knee-length plain short skirt. The skirt was decorated with complicated 3-dimensional embroidery, which completely changed the style of the outfit. It was just that it looked a little redundant, but what was amazing was that when this purple-haired girl wore it, the redundancy actually became a big piece of beauty. The problem was that at this time she was holding the top with one finger and did not put it on. Her upper body was only wearing an emerald green tube top. This conservative tube top couldn't be considered underwear, as the places that should be covered were all covered. However, the soft material of the garment clearly reflected the soft curves of the young girl's chest, especially the naked fragrant shoulders and the slim waist, which revealed a delicate and youthful sexiness. Sulu had an awkward expression and put on his sunglasses indoors. Although the relationship between him and this superstar was very close, she was still his dream lover. Suddenly seeing such a beautiful scene, his heart would always beat a little strangely, but he didn't expect that he would blush. Don't peep with your sunglasses. Be careful that I will sue you in court. You know, the Children's Rights Protection Fund didn't even win a lawsuit against me. After experiencing a scene similar to a reunion, Jian Shuier didn't mind showing the loveliness that she usually only showed in front of the people closest to her in front of Sulu. She often smiled and stuck out her tongue to act cute. It was probably because Sulu was the student of the father that she had never met before. This deepened the sense of closeness and trust that originally existed. Today, Sulu naturally knew the truth of the lawsuit that shocked the entire Federation. Jian Shuier hid her identity and went to the capital alone to enter the Federation television station. The elders of the Feiqing family didn't know how to be angry, but this girl cast a clear and stubborn temperament from then on. Her family had no way to deal with her, so they thought of pushing the Children's Fund behind the scenes to sue the Federation television station. With the military as the background, the Children's Fund naturally fought the lawsuit heroically. In the end, even senior officials in the president's residence were sued by them. However, in the end, it was Justice He Ying who declared that Jian Shuier could choose her own life, and the old man in Feiqing had no choice but to accept this point. The general public of the Federation only knew that Jian Shuier won the lawsuit, but they didn't know that she won the invincible Federation army god. It was like countless burning suns. Su Li's eyes squinted under the constant flashes of the photographers. He squinted extremely hard as he thought to himself. Behind the photographers was the press conference hall of the Venus Hotel. Today, the publicity officials of the Westwood's Frontline Military Command and the guests who came from afar would jointly hold a press conference about the victory concert. The military sent Major General Chun, who was in charge of publicity matters in the 4th Military Region, to express its absolute importance. As for the performance team, as the only protagonist, Jian Shuier, the national girl, naturally had to be present in person. Thinking of this press conference outside of the itinerary, Sulu felt a little strange. The storm 3 days ago could have been settled with a phone call, but under the joint performance of Zhong Erlang and Madman Li, it became a story that shocked the entire upper class of the West Woods. In this case, Jian Shui'er's itinerary could no longer be kept secret from the public. After an emergency discussion, the military decided to release the specific details of the concert in advance and create momentum. After all, this was a victory concert intended to inspire the morale of the entire Federation and to promote the war with the Empire. It couldn't be held quietly. In the flashes, Jian Shui'er walked along the corridor and waved to the reporters, which caused a frenzy. It had been more than a year since she left the Federation's stage, and not a single media outlet had been able to dig up any information about her. Many of her fanatical admirers even thought that this national girl might quit the entertainment industry. They were so sad that they couldn't help themselves. Who would have thought that she would suddenly appear in the Westwoods and announce that she would be holding a comeback concert soon? Of course, it attracted the attention of countless news reporters. Naturally, the reporters from the capital ring couldn't make it. Most of the reporters present today were military reporters, and they didn't expect to be so lucky. It should be known that the name of the national girl represented ratings and news effect, whether it was the long-lasting lawsuit, the 2 concerts that were accompanied by explosions, or her every appearance. There was a saying that it was often difficult for a girl star to control the stage, but Jian Shui'er was obviously an exception. She was calm and gentle, and showed the most beautiful side of a star. But no one would have thought that at this time she was asking, "What time is the spaceship taking off? Is the Westwoods roast lamb leg that you promised to treat me in time?" In the cameras of the reporters, the national girl's lips were slightly open, revealing her white teeth. Her smile was exceptionally bright, and no one thought of the question that she was thinking at this time. The expressions of the people around her were slightly strange, but they heard this sentence and guessed who she was talking to. They all looked at Sulu behind her. Sulu nodded. Most of the members of Team 7 had already taken control of the key positions at the press conference. In addition to the members who stayed behind in Sulu, there were 4 people in black suits who followed Jian Shui'er. Amid the flashes and clamor, the 4 members clearly heard the 2 sentences of the conversation, and the expressions on their faces were slightly strange. Just like Sister Tong, the members of Group 7 also felt that there was something strange between their boss and the national girl. When they heard these 2 sentences that sounded very normal, they couldn't help but think to themselves, if there's nothing going on between them, who would believe it? Apart from the silent criticism, the members of Team 7 actually felt proud in their hearts. They were even prouder than when Sulu had destroyed the headquarters of the Iron 7th Division. There were countless soldiers in the Federation, but when it came to fighting strength, Team 7 was definitely not afraid. Now that their boss had gotten the national girl that everyone adored, this kind of fighting strength, who could compare to this kind of fighting strength? A publicity officer of the Westwoods Military District acted as a guest host and smiled as he described the general itinerary of Miss Jian Shui'er, but he was unwilling to disclose the specific time and location of the victory concert. He pointed outside the window to a large building under the Tsong Mountains that faced the sea and said loudly, "When the victory concert is held, the Tsong Mountain Stadium will be broadcasted live. The local stars of the Westwoods and the special representatives of the military will participate." The reporters understood the meaning of these words. The Tsong Mountain Stadium was grand and magnificent, but it was actually just a side venue. Someone asked, "Where is the main venue of the victory concert?" The host deliberately paused for a moment and then said firmly, "It is my honor to inform everyone that Miss Jian Shui'er will personally go to the front line and sing for the brave soldiers of the Federation." The press conference suddenly quieted down. The Westwoods was the front line of the Federation, but the real front line was the planets that were full of smoke and fire. Most of the reporters present were military reporters, so they naturally knew the danger that the 2 words, front line, represented. Jian Shui'er had been quiet and even seemed to be obedient as she sat behind the table without saying a word. At this time, countless cameras were activated again, and only the sound of small motors could be heard in the silence. After a moment of silence, a reporter asked with a serious expression, "Is the military confident in Miss Jian Shui'er's safety? Also, the victory concert will be held at the front line." "Which front line exactly? You also said that the military is very grateful for Miss Jian Shui'er's bravery. In order to protect her safety, we cannot disclose the specific location of the concert," the host answered. This explanation made the reporters immediately stop asking questions. They were all reporters who ran the military line and were very clear about the importance of safety. Sulu had been standing silently in the shadows below the stage, 5 meters away from Jian Shui'er, ready to rush up to rescue her at any time. He quietly looked at the unfamiliar scene of the press conference and suddenly felt a little strange, because it was obvious that a few reporters began to secretly take pictures of him after whispering a few words. Chapter 395. Until the end of the press conference, the accident that Sulu was worried about didn't happen. In a foreign land, although he had the full cooperation of the military, it was very difficult to completely control the entire hotel and eliminate all potential dangers with only a dozen men from Group 7 and dozens of guns. He had to be careful. On the rostrum, Major General Chun, who was in charge of the 4th Military Region, had just finished his passionate speech. His words were full of passion and provocation, and even the veteran military reporters were encouraged to rush to the front line immediately to see how the Federal Army would sweep away the remnants of the Imperial Expeditionary Army that were holed up on the peripheral planets like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Then Jian Shui'er expressed her feelings after coming to the West Woods. At this time, even she noticed that some reporters under the stage seemed to be secretly taking photos of Sulu, and more people were taking photos. Sulu wore sunglasses and let the reporters take photos with a blank face, but he had a lot of doubts in his mind. What happened? However, as the head of security, he couldn't leave Jian Shui'er's side in this kind of complicated situation. During the question and answer session before the end of the press conference, the reporters of the Federation, who had always been protective of Jian Shui'er, finally bravely broke the past convention and pointed to Sulu in the corner and asked, "Miss Jian Shui'er, please forgive us for being presumptuous, but we really want to know this gentleman. What is your relationship with you?" Even if Sulu was a thick-skinned person, he still couldn't help but be shocked when he suddenly became the target of thousands of people's accusations. Major General Chun on the rostrum frowned and wondered if these reporters actually knew the true identity of Lieutenant Colonel Sulu. The reporters who didn't know the inside story were curious about the question of their colleague, and the members of the performance team and the security team were curious about their curiosity. Only the reporters who had just received the news were really curious about Jian Shui'er's answer. Of course, they thought that this national girl would answer as flawlessly as usual, cute and amiable. So when they heard Jian Shui'er's real answer, there was a burst of incredulous exclamations in the room. Jian Shui'er opened her big eyes and looked at the reporter curiously. After a slight pause, she seriously replied, "He is my friend." The Golden Star Hotel was a military property, so the 4th Military Region sent a lot of soldiers to maintain order. Fortunately, the riot of reporters, who was almost triggered by Jian Shui'er's answer, was blocked behind the corridor. They could only watch the mysterious man in sunglasses and Jian Shui'er disappear in the corridor. Back to the suite on the top floor, Sister Tong turned on the TV and the internet as quickly as possible. Everyone looked at the headlines on TV and the large eye-catching words in the online community. Only then did they understand why the reporters were in such a commotion today. Jian Shui'er held her slightly hot cheeks with both hands and gently stuck out her tongue. She looked at Sulu and smiled. Sorry for the trouble. Previously, when she answered the reporter's question and said that Sulu was her friend, it was purely natural. According to her usual image of a cute national girl in the Federation, it was easy for the reporters and audience to accept her security director as a friend. However, the word friend seemed rather inappropriate today. In the studio of the Federal News Channel, the female anchor, who was usually very serious, had a spring in her eyes and a smile on her red lips. The nation's young lady Jian Shui'er has not appeared in front of the public since the terrorist attack in the 4 provinces. Now that the mastermind behind the terrorist attack has been punished by the law, our cute national girl has appeared again. But this time she appeared in the West Woods. According to the Department of Defense's press release, we learned that Miss Jian Shui'er will hold a concert called Victory in the West Woods. As for the specific situation, we will send the live broadcast of the concert press conference later. And this morning, an explosive news about the national girl appeared on the Federation's network in advance. The female anchor zoomed in on the photo in the background and said with a smile, "This is the exclusive beach of the Golden Star Hotel in the West Woods. Someone accidentally took this photo." The photo zoomed in on the Federation news channel was a bit blurry. It seemed that the person who took the photo didn't use professional equipment, but it could still be clearly distinguished that the girl hugging a young man in front of the blue sea and white sand was Jian Shuier. At that time, Jian Shuier was only wearing a dark blue swimsuit. The intimacy was obvious. If I remember correctly, this is the first time the national girl appeared in a swimsuit in public, a white-haired old man in the studio said with a smile. The Federation girl has grown up after all. She has indeed grown up. The female anchor said with a smile, I think that countless families in the Federation have watched her grow up day by day since she was 12 years old. They must have been waiting for the day when the national girl fell in love. But they didn't expect that this day would come so suddenly. Sister Tong and her 2 female assistants looked at Jian Shuier on the sofa, and Sulu standing beside her with a complicated expression. Jian Shuier was actually watching the news with great interest, and Sulu didn't seem to be affected by it, but his expression was a bit ugly. The photo that was taken in secret first appeared on the public network of the Federation, and immediately raised a huge uproar. Even the news channels of the major TV stations that had always been serious immediately produced special programs to review Jian Shuier's brilliant career. Then, with a warm tone, they began to speculate about the love affairs of the national girls. There was no telling how many uncles and aunts were crying because of it. The Westwoods was so far away from the capital ring that the people in the penthouse suites didn't know about it until now. Then, the Federation's news channel began to broadcast the news conference. The director kept focusing on Sulu, who was in the shadows, and at the same time, repeated Jian Shuier's response of saying that he was a friend several times. Sister Tong turned off the TV in annoyance, only to find that the situation on the internet was even worse. Everyone was guessing who the love interest of the nation's girl was. There were all kinds of different analyses. Some people guessed that it should be a rich family's son from Givenchy's summer outfit, but more people saw the news conference broadcast earlier and thought that it was a love story that could be compared to a movie's bodyguard and a celebrity. Sulu lowered his head and looked at the black Givenchy summer clothes he was wearing. He thought that it was time for him to change his clothes. Just like how the Federation's news channel created a warm and positive tone for the news, most people on the internet followed the development of the situation with a kind attitude. But there were also some fanatical supporters who began to clamor on the internet to find the lucky scum, who shamelessly blasphemed the young goddess, secret photo, leak, storm, acquiescence. This plot is really vulgar. On the road, when they saw Zhong Ziqi's poem displayed on the white Duran limousine, Sulu and Jian Shuier tacitly came to a vulgar conclusion. At this time, as the people involved in the explosive news of the Federation, they looked at each other and came to the same conclusion again. Sister Tong didn't understand what they were talking about. If the old man thinks that he can hide from us like this, he is insulting his intelligence as the god of war. Jian Shuier helplessly rubbed her forehead and muttered. The Golden Star Hotel was heavily guarded by soldiers. More importantly, the vantage points from which they could see the beach were closely monitored by Team 7. If it wasn't for the military, how could they have taken that photo? Sulu even suspected that someone in Team 7 had taken this photo. After all, it was clearly the military's will to expose this news. The most important evidence was that whether it was the Federation's news channel, other private TV stations, or even the supposedly free internet, their comments on this news were so warm and positive. Other than the actions of the Federation government, or the terrifying influence of the old man, who could do this? What does the old man want to do? Jian Shuier held her chin, frowned, and looked at the blue sky outside the window and said, I really want to call back and ask him. Sulu was Feng Yu's student, so the old man liked him very much. He could imagine how much the old man doted on Jian Shuier over the years. Maybe he was also worried about Jian Shuier's life. But after all, he was the Federation's god of war. Why would he personally care about such a small matter? The outside of the Golden Star Hotel was full of cameras. Of course, they were standard equipment for news reporters. Although this was a military property and the security was tight, the other party used the freedom of the press as an excuse, so the Westwoods military couldn't drive all these reporters away. Under such circumstances, the promised barbecued lamb leg for supper naturally fell through. At 11 o'clock that night, The motorcade that had been on standby drove out of the hotel's underground parking lot one by one and drove to the Chongfeng military base again. However, this news couldn't be stopped. At the entrance of the hotel, countless cameras surrounded Jian Shuier and Su Lu behind her. These reporters from major news media in the Westwoods were basically running the military line. While the cultural reporters of the capital ring were still trying to find the identity of the man who hugged Jian Shuier, these military reporters who had a natural advantage had already keenly found another breaking point. Several microphones were handed in front of Su Lu, and almost knocked his sunglasses off. He and the members of Group 7 firmly protected Jian Shuier in the middle of the group, but they forgot that they were also half a news person now, so they couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. "Are you Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu?" No comment. Su Lu somewhat awkwardly answered according to Sister Tong's instructions, but he was shocked that the reporters recognized him. The eyes behind the sunglasses gradually narrowed. He vaguely caught the real intention of the federal military and the old man to create this news. What did the current Federation need the most? Chapter 396. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. I heard that you are a key engineer in the development of the MX Mecha? A reporter from a weapons magazine asked excitedly. We did not see your name on the MX Mecha list, but we have already confirmed this with many engineers from the Nutshell Engineering Department and the technical director of Shangqiu. Please confirm this rumor. Su Lu stopped in his tracks, slightly stunned. Jian Shuier, who was protected by the wall of Team 7 members, smiled apologetically at him and then got into the car, leaving him alone with the reporters. There's also a rumor that you defeated Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng in the MX Mecha's test battle. The reporter who had done his homework shouted before all the other reporters could finish their questions. In this reporter's opinion, being able to interview a soldier who had defeated the descendant of the military god's family was truly a rare opportunity in his career. Moreover, the military reporters based in the Westwoods had obtained information on this young man through various means, and they felt that this person carried too much of a legend. The other reporters could not take it anymore. They chased after Su Lu and shouted, "From what we know, you are a student of Professor Shen Yulin at the Husk Institute. Is it because of this relationship that you bravely exposed the plagiarism at the Federal Academy of Science and forced the resignation of the previous dean, Lin Yuanhu?" Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, I heard that you were the one who wrote the teaching materials for the new MX Mecha model for the 4 major military academies. You are an engineer and have not received any systematic mecha operation training. Why does the military have so much confidence in you? And I heard that you were once a mecha instructor at the S1 training base? There are rumors that you are a student of the military god, Marshal Li. This reporter was more daring, but he was not so daring as to recklessly accuse Su Lu of being Li Pifu's illegitimate son. He asked in a sharp voice, and I heard that President Pabre also admires you a lot. He once invited you into the president's official residence to attend the first family dinner? You are a recipient of the Purple Star Medal. Why have I never seen you wearing it? Su Lu silently thought that it was just an ordinary dinner. As for the medal, did he have to wear it on his body every day to tell all the passers-by what he had done? He lowered his head and walked forward. However, the distance from the main entrance of the Golden Star Hotel to the designated location was less than 100 meters. Surrounded by these stormy waves of reporters, it seemed so long. It seemed to be much more difficult than breaking into the Iron 7th Division's camp from the top of Blue Pond Mountain. After graduating from the Ministry of National Defense, you successfully broke through the Iron 7th Division's defense battalion with just a new MX Mecha. Do you have any thoughts on this news? You should know that the Iron 7th Division has participated in countless military exercises in the past 10 years and has never failed. It was obvious that not only did the reporter from the Weapons Journal at the beginning do his homework, but the reporters who ran the military line only took half a day to get enough information from certain departments in the capital ring. Su Lu thought that this news was too exaggerated. He had only broken into the camp of the Iron 7th Division's defense battalion. If he were to face the entire defense battalion alone, he would only be able to escape. He wanted to explain a little, but he remembered Sister Tong's order. He could only say that he had no comment and continued to walk with his head down. However, at this moment, a reporter finally asked a question that made him stop abruptly. According to your classmates when you were studying at Lin High University, you were once in a relationship. The person you were in love with was the spokesperson of the Green Dragon Mountain Anti-Government Army, Ms. Zhang Xiaoming, also known as the Leaf of Green Dragon Mountain. Regarding this love story, will it cause any trouble to your military life? Su Li's body stiffened slightly. He raised his head and looked for the face of the reporter in the flashing lights around him. The noisy scene suddenly quieted down because of his actions. However, after a moment of silence, he did not say anything in the end. In the silence, a reporter finally mustered up the courage to ask again. As the youngest lieutenant colonel in the Federation, why did the Ministry of National Defense let you work part-time at Whitewater Company? We have all seen your resume, and felt that it was a little unbelievable that you became Miss Jian Shuier Security Director. Are you carrying out a secret military mission or? All the reporters had been waiting to ask this last question, so at this moment, except for the reporter who bravely asked the question loudly, there was absolute silence. Countless flashing lights and microphones were placed in front of Su Lu. You and Miss Jian Shuier are really in love. Su Lu did not answer this question. In fact, the reporters did not need him to answer. As journalists, it was not important whether the interviewee answered or not. The most important thing was that the reporters needed to let the audience and readers know through their own questions that Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu had done a lot of great things, and that this person was the love interest of the nation's young girl Jian Shuier. In the capital ring, which was extremely far away from the Westwoods region, many television viewers were watching the live broadcast on the news channel. However, it was delayed by a few minutes compared to the real-time situation. The image of the young man wearing sunglasses being besieged by the reporters entered the TV screens of thousands of households and caused a commotion. A few hours ago, they had only looked at the photo and were curious and happy to guess the identity of this young man. Now they learned more from the mouths of these reporters. A rising star of the future in the military, who was likely to become a hero of the Federation in the future, and a nation's young girl who was loved by all the citizens of the Federation. This was truly a match made in heaven. This was a warm, beautiful, and even respectable love story. Respectable was very important. On the top floor of the Sanlin Federation Bank in the Capital Special District, Li Xiuzhu turned off the TV. He held a glass of light-colored wine and quietly turned his head. Through the transparent glass curtain wall, he looked at the tens of thousands of lights in the Federation. He thought to himself that there must be many people like him who also saw the previous scene. He took a small sip of the wine and struggled to maintain a calm expression on his face. He did not let the true anger in his heart show. His father, that old man who liked to wear small round hats, often persuaded him to walk down the building and stand on the ground to see the world. However, today he discovered that no matter where he stood, his heart was the same. On the other side of the towering Sanlin Bank building, Li Xiaotong was having dinner in his room full of flowers. The sound coming from the holographic screen was extremely loud and clear. His expression was extremely happy, and the cold aura of the past that was like snow plum blossoms was swept away. He raised the red wine and looked at the battered and exhausted Su Lu on the news with a smile. He said with a smile, "You're a bit faster than I thought. This glass of wine is to you, and also to my truly battered big brother." The Parliament building was brightly lit. A whole row of offices in the direction of the Stone Hall had now been emptied. They were now the Green Dragon Mountain's contact office. For the great reconciliation of the Federation, President Pabre and the big shots of Parliament showed unprecedented sincerity. A young confidential official looked at the girl in the room worriedly. Thinking of the questions of the reporters in the news, he could not help but ask, "Do you want to go eat first? There are so many things that you can't finish in a short time." Zhang Xiaoming gently pushed up the black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of her nose with the tip of a finger. She looked up and said with a smile, "Qingzhou, you don't have to worry about me. I'm fine." She was now the spokesperson of Green Dragon Mountain in the capital ring. She had more important tasks in private and was extremely busy every day. However, her eyes looked through the glasses and fell on the files, but she did not move at all. In fact, she had been listening to the news on the TV and thinking about how the reporters mentioned her. "You deserve better." She hid the sadness in her heart, forced a smile, and officially began to work. In a quiet manner in the capital of Huachin State, a middle-aged woman upstairs was earnestly persuading her young lady, "Mimi, I know you're not happy, but you still have to eat." "I'm not unhappy, it's just, I feel a little nervous." Nan Xiangmei asked the nanny to leave and return to the table. Looking at the photo that caused the commotion, her beautiful eyebrows slightly wrinkled. She clasped her hands together and softly prayed, "No, don't." The silver-gray light battleship was like a silver shuttle, sailing in the quiet and even quiet space. With the help of the gravitational pull of the giant planet, it accelerated again. After flying through the shadow of the giant planet, the Westwood sun on the right suddenly shone. Countless golden rays shone on the surface of the battleship. It was not warm but made people feel a little cold. "How does it feel to be on the news?" Lan Xiaolong followed behind Su Lu and made fun of him. At this time they were doing an inspection of the core area of the battleship. Although the Westwood's military would protect the safety of the performing team, there was still a new MX in the core area. The security of Team 7 would not be relaxed because of this. Su Lu waved his hand in annoyance and did not say anything. Then he gently knocked on the door and walked in. Lan Xiaolong looked at the tightly closed door and thought of the national girl in the room. He shrugged and thought, "Is this the shame and anger of the whole Federation after their affair was exposed? I'm very sorry for causing so much trouble for you." Jian Shui turned around from the window and helplessly shrugged with a smile. It was a very similar action. Lan Xiaolong's shrug was like a hooligan, but this girl's shrug was incomparably cute. Su Lu stood silently behind her. Right now, the whole Federation saw them as a perfect couple. They knew very well that this was not the case at all, but they could not help but sigh with emotion at the powerful ability of the Ministry of National Defense's publicity department to create momentum. Their hearts were slightly heavy. If it had only been an exclusive interview and deliberate publicity by the military, the media and Federation citizens would definitely not have been so interested in Su Lu. This was because whether it was the MX Mecha or any other feats, for the average secular society, they would always seem a little distant. But this matter involved the national girl Jian Shuier, and that was different. The media and citizens would spontaneously unearth everything related to Su Lu. Li Feng was on a secret mission at the front lines, so Jian Shuier was unable to contact him. She cocked her head and thought for a while, and then finally dialed Li Jiedu's number. She asked softly over the phone, "Is the marshal not feeling well recently?" Chapter 397. Regarding this news, the people of the Federation had different reactions. After being shocked, they were curious, and after being curious, they gave their blessings. However, among those related to Su Lu and Jian Shuier, Nan Xiangmei was disappointed and sad, Zhang Xiaoming had mixed feelings, and Li Xiuzhu was about to go crazy under his calm expression. The second young master of the Westwoods, Zhong Zizi, smashed the television angrily. Zhou Yu, who was continuing her studies in Linhai, held her son Zhou Liuhua and looked at the snow outside the window. She sneered, thinking that Su Lu was really a lucky bastard. Su Lu and Jian Shuier had different reactions from everyone else. This was because they knew that this news was fake, so they started to speculate about the origin of this incident, or rather the intentions of the perpetrator. The more they speculated, the heavier their mood became. In the preparation for the universal war with the Empire, the Federation needed a hero to unite the will of the Federation citizens and mobilize the entire society to fight together. This was the reason they could think of. Of course, Su Lu did not have this kind of influence now. He had not even been to the front lines, but whether it was the development of the MX Mecha, his personal combat strength, or his legendary life, he already had some kind of foundation or embryonic form. As the saying went, everything was ready, except for the east wind. The only thing he lacked now was outstanding military achievements. If there were no accidents, the Iron 7th Division and their commander, Du Shaoqing, would be another Federation hero and collective hero created by the cooperation of the president and the military. However, the part that Su Lu represented could not be replaced. This was because he had once displayed that kind of heroic spirit during the assassination of Macklin. Within the Federation on the battlefield, this kind of heroic spirit was severely criticized. However, in terms of publicity, this kind of spirit was what the military's propaganda department needed the most. It must be known that many years ago, When the Federation's expeditionary army was in desperate straits and society was in turmoil, it was Li Pifu's most famous act of heroism that turned the tide. The people of the Federation liked this kind of person and needed this kind of person to inspire the courage in their hearts and overcome the fear of the Empire's invaders. The Federation needed a hero, so they would create one. They had already built a large stage for Su Lu on the battlefield. They were just waiting for him to control his mecha and slaughter his enemies. At that time, they would once again activate the propaganda machine and paint his military uniform with a layer of golden light that could not be looked directly at. Of course, this would depend on Su Li's future performance on the battlefield. War god Li Pifu was a hero created by the collective will of the Federation many years ago. But if it wasn't for this legendary character who had written countless legendary stories that were difficult to replicate, what use would the Federation's propaganda machine be? However, the Federation already had war god Li Pifu. Why were they already preparing for something that would happen many years later? My brother said that the marshal's health is quite good. I don't know if it's true, Jian Shui, said worriedly as she hung up the phone and frowned slightly. She was worried about the same thing as Su Lu, so she no longer referred to the war god as old man. War god Li Pifu's health condition was definitely the most important matter in the Federation. It was also the highest level of secret. Although they were the descendants of that old man, they could not be completely sure. 197 Federation Standard Hours later, the light warship left the core star region of the West Forest region. Under the protection of a Federation fleet, it quietly entered the Huiming corridor. After flying in space for a period of time, they could see a planet with an extremely strange color appear above the porthole. This planet was of average size. Because of the tilt angle, the planet's surface received extremely uneven sunlight. They could clearly see that 1/3 of the surface of the northern hemisphere was covered in ice and snow, while 2/3 of the lower hemisphere was green and blue. It was very beautiful. Every 3,000 years, this planet will automatically correct its tilt angle. The snow and ice in the northern hemisphere will melt in large amounts and rush into the low-lying areas in the southern hemisphere, bringing the most spectacular and terrifying ice flow. Bai Yulan stood beside Su Lu and explained softly, the early developers of the Federation paid an extremely heavy price in order to establish an administrative region on this planet. At that time, Commander Zhong of the Westwoods region asked the people who developed the planet to ignore the ice flow. So this most remote administrative planet of the Federation was named 5460. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the planet. Although his eyes were sharp, he still could not see the Empire's warship on the other side of the planet. However, he knew that the Empire's people were there. The Empire's expeditionary force had established a base in the northern hemisphere of 5460, and the location of Jian Shui's victory concert was in the southern hemisphere. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the lonely planet in space. He suddenly said, "It wasn't until I got the details of the plan that I found out that the Empire's expeditionary force still occupied the 3 administrative planets in the Westwoods region." He turned to look at Bai Yulan and asked, "When I was young, I watched the news on TV. I only knew that the Federal Army was invincible, and that the Empire's people were defeated. I thought that these beasts had been driven to the mineral planets where it was difficult to survive. Why didn't the Federation ever mention these things?" Bai Yulan explained softly, "This is necessary for publicity. As long as the military is not determined to take back the 3 administrative planets occupied by the Empire, they will deliberately downplay this fact. When the Empire's expeditionary force attacked, most of the residents had already evacuated, and the 3 star systems, including 5460, were too remote. It was easy to forget. What about the Federation's news media? Most of the people evacuated, which means that there must be some people left on those planets. Our compatriots fell under the iron hooves of the Empire's people. After so many years, did no one think of rescuing them?" Su Li's furrowed brows were full of shock and doubt. Bai Yulan replied, "This is the desolate edge of the universe. It is the outermost area of the Federation's colonization and development. It is not very valuable. The most important thing is that without the close protection of the military, the reporters cannot enter the front lines. I can roughly understand. If the news media agitates too much, and the military is not prepared, they will be kidnapped by public opinion and launch a counterattack. It is very likely to destroy the entire plan, but it feels a little strange. Sulu slowly lowered his head and looked at the white, green, and blue tricolored planets that were getting closer and closer. He said, in order to bypass the Gary Corridor and the Night Scorpion Nebula, the Empire did not hesitate to spend 7 years on long-distance space travel to launch a magnificent expedition. But this is the Federation. We have the glory of the Charter. How can they still survive? 6 years and 9 months. Bai Yulan reported a time that all the Federation's soldiers remembered. The Empire Expeditionary Force needs 6 years and 9 months to leave the mainland and reach the West Woods. In the decades after the First Space War, the successive emperors of the Empire sent 3 million soldiers to invade the West Woods. This is equivalent to 2/3 of the Federation's total number of soldiers at the same time. In the face of such powerful invaders, the Federation and the glory of the Charter made them pay a heavy price. Now there are at most 700,000 people left, and they are scattered across 3 galaxies. Speaking of the glory of the Charter, the first thing any Empire soldier has to do when invading a Federation planet is to destroy all the aircrafts and official electronic devices of the Federation in the controlled area of the planet. This is because they know better than us how terrifying the Charter is. They want to destroy the eyes and ears of the Charter. Sulu was thoughtful. Yes, but they have spent decades and only managed to make the space above their heads slightly safer. Bai Yulan smiled elegantly, but her smile was full of mockery. It was unknown whether she was mocking the Empire's people or the Federation's big shots. She continued, the Federation has never admitted that any territory has been occupied because of this. Without the glory of the Charter, of course, cannot be considered as the Federation's territory. Bullshit logic. Sulu shook his head. Unknowingly, all the members of Group 7 stood behind Sulu and Bai Yulan. Even the staff of Jian Shue'er's performance team walked out of their respective rooms. Dozens of people silently looked at the planet that was becoming clearer and clearer outside the porthole. They could even faintly see the bright lights that occasionally lit up at the boundary between light and dark on the planet. Hydralus 2-bomb dense firing array. Xiong Linquan stared at the lights in a daze and said subconsciously. Whether it was the first time for people to come to the real front line or not, at this moment, they could feel a solemn and bloody aura spreading from the inconspicuous planet in front of them. Because this planet was 5,460, a battlefield on the boundary between the glaciers and forests in the northern hemisphere of the planet, a circular defense base was hidden in the middle. Countless heavy firepower weapons were placed behind the base's bulletproof automatic armor. Within a radius of 130 kilometers around the base, there were also countless sophisticated radar arrays and carefully disguised mechas. The resources transported from the controlled mineral planets were not enough to support the daily logistics of this army. Therefore, whether it was the base or the densely packed barracks, the buildings were often built with local materials. Although they were sturdy, they looked particularly simple and crude, and they couldn't reflect the royal style that these soldiers were most passionate about. The heavy alloy gate on the ground slowly opened. The black 3-speed space missile painted with hibiscus patterns followed the precise positioning of the radar and slowly adjusted its direction. With the command of the commander, the base of the giant missile began to spew out flames. The powerful driving force made the whole earth begin to tremble. The forest was filled with the angry protesting cries of native animals. The missile dragged a long white tail and flew at high speed toward the dark sky. It was impossible to see its target with the naked eye. It seemed that this missile powered by liquid hydrogen fuel could only penetrate a large hole in the sky of the planet, and then powerlessly break free from the gravitational force and drift forever in the quiet and gloomy universe. Target hit. A soldier wearing an old gray coat and a mink hat looked at the display on the master control system, coughed violently twice, and numbly reported, the enemy's self-changing orbit satellite was successfully destroyed. In front of the command room, the senior general with an aged face held a cup of hot tea and drank 2 mouthfuls. His eyes were a little cloudy and lifeless as he sighed with a hoarse voice, "Sometimes I really envy those guys in the south for being rich. Orbit-changing satellites are so expensive. They know that we will definitely take them down, but they still put them on top of us every day." Chapter 398. The officers were originally silent and indifferent, but when they heard the words His Majesty, it was as if they were struck by an electric current. With a whoosh, all of them stood up and performed a military salute in unison, shouting loudly, "Long live His Majesty!" His voice echoed in the empty command room and did not disappear for a long time. The officers, who had been tortured by years of war and homesickness, were about to go crazy. Even if they were not really excited in front of their colleagues, their faces were still red. It seemed that if they did not do this, they would not be able to show their fanatical loyalty to His Majesty. Unfortunately, one of the officers could not hold back his coughing, and the continuous coughing slightly diluted the fanaticism in the room. "Norman, if you're sick, just rest. Those things will naturally be taken care of by the ground forces. If it really doesn't work, those few pitiful warships in space can still chase after them." After the officers sat down, the old general looked gently at the coughing officer and said this. But from the corner of his eyes, he noticed that the officers under him had returned to their previous numb expressions. The Federation soldiers in the South dreamed every day of reconstructing the glory of the Charter in the Northern Hemisphere, sending out satellites and electronic surveillance equipment, regardless of the cost. The Imperial Expeditionary Force in the Northern Hemisphere fought every day, and the two sides seemed to have formed some kind of tacit agreement. Every time at a fixed time they would put on a show of air guns and air balloons. The old general did not blame the numbness of the officers under him. No matter who it was, to stay on a planet so far away from home for so many years, fighting a war that was not tragic but particularly lingering every day, they could only gradually fall into a state of boredom. "I'm fine." The officer called Norman had the most common surname in the Empire. He coughed twice, walked in front of the old general, and said, "General, the clearing of the forest today is a little slow. Should we send out the backup mecha battalion? To prevent the Federation from reconstructing the glory of the Charter, other than the spacecrafts and satellites in space, what was more troublesome for the Imperial Expeditionary Force was the small automatic electronic surveillance equipment that the enemy used the large transport aircraft to spread in the forest. Although they could find and destroy these annoying little things through frequency detection, there were too many of them. 3 mecha squadrons were needed to clear them out every day. Do as you see fit. If we don't clean up, we won't be able to sleep peacefully." The old general smiled gently. The computer system in the command room suddenly beeped. An officer quickly walked over and submitted an enemy intelligence report. According to the electronic surveillance, 11 minutes ago, a light warship under the escort of a federal fleet landed at Suzhou Airport in the Southern Hemisphere. The old general put on his spectacles, which had been badly worn out, and read carefully for a while. Then, he shook his head and said with a smile, "Which big shot of the Federation do you think is in this warship? I can't guess, but it shouldn't be their reinforcements." The Norman officer shook his head. "You should pay more attention to the Federation's news, even though their language is a bit difficult to learn." The old general smiled and said, "The one who came today should be their national girl. I didn't expect that the venue of the concert would be here." The old general said, "That's not important. But there has been a lot of activity in the South recently. They should be sending more troops." A hint of vigilance flashed through the pale blue eyes of the Norman officer as he asked, "What should we do?" The old general smiled and said, "We won't do anything. This circular defense base was the largest military base of the Imperial Expeditionary Force on planet 5460. The headquarters of the Maplewoods Alliance was located here. In the Empire's military system, the Alliance had 5 brigades under it. Its military strength was basically equivalent to an army of the Federation. As for special wartime equipment like the Expeditionary Force, it had more people. The old general, who had just walked out of the command room and was walking toward the edge of the forest with the accompaniment of an orderly, was none other than the commander of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maplewoods Alliance, Lieutenant General Ambley. This was the northern hemisphere of the planet, close to the glaciers that had only slightly melted once every 3,000 years. Although the base was at the edge of the forest, it was still cold, and most of the trees were coniferous. It had snowed last night, making it extremely difficult to walk. Ambley refused the help of the orderlies and walked with great difficulty, one step at a time. As one of the most important military leaders of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, He knew very well that the Federation was preparing for a major operation. In the past few months, the frequency of warships taking off and landing in the Southern Federation base was clearly much higher than before. However, this general was as stable as a snowy mountain and did not intend to do anything. With the current situation of the Expeditionary Force, he could not do anything. The Expeditionary Force's auxiliary space fleet could at most defend the northern skies, but they could not stop the enemy's reinforcements. In fact, if it were not for the fact that the Federation was already lacking in crystal resources, this old general really could not imagine how many days his lone army could last under the continuous bombardment of the Federal fleet's main cannons. The Empire had been sparing no expense in its huge financial and material resources to bypass the Night Scorpion Nebula and send an endless stream of soldiers and weapons to the front line of the West Woods. However, the old general knew in his heart that the Empire's interstellar transportation capacity had long been squeezed to the limit. If the domestic production capacity could still support such a costly expedition, then the interstellar transportation, which was already behind the Federation to begin with, was on the verge of collapse. Old General Ambly turned around and looked at the glaciers and snowy peaks behind the base, deep in thought. Since the first day the Imperial Expeditionary Force occupied Planet 5460, the 4 commanders of the Maple Forest Alliance had been continuously digging into the glaciers, seeking strategic space and survival space. The old general firmly believed that in this foreign land, even if his army was at a disadvantage in all aspects, as long as he did not make any strategic mistakes, he would definitely be able to persevere. The question was, how many more years did he have to persevere? Strolling in the snowy forest, along the way, countless officers and soldiers saluted this old general, and he warmly returned each and every one of them. The people of the Empire had long hair, and were naturally more resistant to the cold. Their eyes were basically blue or brown, and they fought bravely and coldly. Therefore, in the Federation's propaganda, the people of the Empire were often referred to as beasts. Towards this kind of propaganda, the old general would only laugh it off and would not be angry at all. In his eyes, these children who were far away from home were all good children worthy of respect. Walking into the coniferous forest, there was no one else besides his own orderlies. Only then did General Ambly's dark brown eyes reveal a hint of homesickness. The people of the Empire were indeed resistant to the cold, but who would be willing to spend the cold years by the glaciers? Looking at the coniferous leaves above his head and the squirrels running through them, General Ambly suddenly missed the blazing maple forest of his hometown. It had been 20 years since he left his homeland, and 7 years had been wasted in the vast expanse of space. Then, there was the continuous war in a foreign land. During this process he saw too many subordinates, colleagues, and even superiors die. Being far away from the Empire and fighting alone was not a good feeling, especially when there was no hope in sight. General Ambly had always believed that if it weren't for the fact that communication could pass through the nebula, the Expeditionary Force would be able to hear the majestic voice of the Emperor from time to time. If it weren't for the fact that the Imperial instructors used the dry and isolated environment to thoroughly educate the Expeditionary Force officers and soldiers to be patriotic, the Expeditionary Force in the last 3 star systems would have probably surrendered to the Federation long ago. I wonder what the maple forest of my hometown looks like now. The standards of the Federation and the Empire are about the same. The 2 rows of maple trees behind the room should have grown by now. The old general took off his gloves and lightly patted the Federation's winter trees. Thinking about the red leaves of his homeland, a hint of warmth appeared on his aged face. However, he knew that he would probably never be able to go back in this lifetime, and he would never be able to see the red leaves of his hometown again, unless what those idiots in the military said was true. Let's go. The old general turned around and walked towards the direction of the base, but he saw an injured rabbit struggling beside the snow. He smiled and said, "The animals of the Federation are very fortunate. They were raised by them for so many years, but now they are all eaten by us." The orderlies behind him couldn't help but rub their heads and laugh. The Empire had long grasped the technology to extract hydrogen energy. Relying on the iceberg behind them was equivalent to relying on a huge energy warehouse. That was why the Empire's fleet was able to put most of its transport capacity into the supply of soldiers and supplies. Otherwise, relying on the few protein meat production bases of the expeditionary force would definitely not be able to satisfy the needs of so many troops. What made the soldiers of the Imperial Expeditionary Force the most excited was that this planet was actually filled with countless wild animals. Although they couldn't be used as rations, it was still a wonderful thing to occasionally have a sumptuous meal. On the way back to the base, General Ambly encountered a group of sentinels. This group of sentinels was supported by 3 moon mechas. They had just captured a Federation scout in the forest. In the current era of modern warfare, scouts were very rarely used. Even if the charter network in the Northern Hemisphere was completely destroyed, the Federal Army would rarely send scouts unless it was to confirm some extremely important information. Only when the Military Intelligence Department didn't dare to completely trust the surveillance equipment would they send scouts to take the risk. The Federation scout had delicate facial features and didn't look very old. When he saw Ambly's military uniform, he instantly knew his identity. He opened his mouth and hurriedly said a few words in pure Empire language. Ambly listened quietly for a moment and exchanged a few words with the officer who had finished interrogating him. He smiled at the Federation scout and said, "We have never taken any prisoners between us. You should know that we, the Empire, don't have any extra food." A look of perseverance flashed across the face of the Federation scout. He forced himself to stand up from the ground, but before he could completely stand up, a gunshot rang out. Blood spurted out of his head, and he fell forward heavily into the snow. General Ambly didn't even look at this common scene. He had already walked forward and asked the orderlies beside him with a smile, "What do we eat tonight? I think that rabbit just now was pretty good." Before he entered the base, the old man's dark brown eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. This was because he noticed that the Norman officer and many people in the command room had walked out of the base. They seemed to be waiting for him. Emergency military report. The Norman officer handed over a top-secret electronic document. General Ambly glanced at it. His expression was extremely gloomy. The old fingers holding the electronic document trembled slightly. He said in a low voice, "When did the military have the right to give orders to the Expeditionary Force's specific military operations? A bunch of idiots." The Norman officer had already forgotten to cough. He said in shock and helplessness, "This is His Majesty's order." Chapter 399. There were 2 space tunnels between the Federation and the Empire. They were located at the outer edge of the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor. Many years ago, when the Federation was increasing its efforts to develop the West Woods, the Bureau of Proclamation accidentally discovered these 2 warp holes. After a long period of calculation by the central computer, people deduced that the exits of these 2 warp holes should be in the left sky galaxy. For the Federation, which was expanding its territory step by step in an orderly manner, the left sky galaxy was a distant and unfamiliar world. Even with the most advanced exploration spaceship of the Federation, it would take a full 4 years to reach that place. In fact, countless exploration spaceships had been launched by humans to that world, but all of them eventually disappeared without a trace. They had never returned any useful information. This vast sea of stars was filled with countless dangers. The process of humans conquering the universe seemed to be magnificent, but in reality, the number of galaxies that they could come into contact with was still pitifully small. At this time, when they suddenly discovered that they could reach the distant left sky galaxy through these 2 space tunnels, the entire Federation fell into an uproar. Relying on the amazing computing power of the Federal Central Computer, countless generations of space scientists of the Federal Academy of Science had spent hundreds of years to successfully calculate all the data of these 2 space tunnels. The annihilation curvature of the 3-dimensional warp, and the turbulent period of the violent cosmic ray turbulence in the tunnels were all mapped out. With this precious data of the space tunnels, in addition to the countless years of experience the Federation had in using the warp holes, a fleet that carried the ambition of the Federation to explore the universe slowly entered the space tunnels under the protection of the Army. Then the Federation was shocked to discover that at the other end of the tunnel, the left sky galaxy, which they thought to be barren, already had a civilization that had developed to its current level. That civilization did not welcome their arrival and was extremely warlike and brutal, Since the first dangerous contact in the last few years of the 36th constitutional calendar, the Federation had firmly controlled the control of the space channel between the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor. Before the Imperium could calculate the data of the space channel, it could never organize a large invasion fleet to break through the Night Scorpion Nebula, which was full of stars and gravitational fields, and the Gary Corridor, which was full of violent ray turbulence. Therefore, the expedition army sent by the violent Imperium could only detour around the Night Scorpion Nebula, and spend 7 years and a lot of energy before they could reach the Westwoods at the border of the Federation. The reason why the Federation was able to remain stable in the face of the Empire's barbaric and violent invasion was because of the glory of the Charter, which was spread throughout the universe where the Federation was located. The 2 space passages under their control played an important role. The creator of the universe was a very mysterious existence. Any large fleet that tried to force its way through the shortcuts it created before grasping the rules it left behind would cause the sky to change color and space to become turbulent. However, this universe did not seem to have much interest in those lowly existences it disdained. The space storm caused by any aircraft that entered the space channel was directly proportional to the mass of the aircraft. Although the Imperium was still unable to send an army to break through the space channel, in the past few decades, many brave Imperial Royal Mecha warriors rode simple and crude small spaceships, like ants, quietly and even humbly passed through the space channel under the watchful eyes of the creator of the universe. This was an extremely dangerous attempt. Although the space storm caused by the small spaceships was relatively smaller, the defense of the small spaceships was also extremely weak. Those spaceships that constantly tried to sneak through were like a small boat in the ocean. They could be sunk to the bottom of the ocean at any time, and never be able to turn over again. Even if the Imperium Special Forces were lucky enough to break through the space channel, they would be greeted by the Federal Fleet's never-ending surveillance and precision attacks outside the space channel. Only by relying on great strength and unbelievable luck could the Imperium Special Forces achieve their tactical objectives. However, they were unable to penetrate deep into the Federation, and could only land on the Bermuda mineral planet near Gary Corridor. During this process, for every 100 top-notch special mecha warriors that the Imperium sent out, at most 7 or 8 of them would be able to land on the surface of the Bermuda mineral planet alive. Although there were not many of them, the federal military would never let their guard down. The mission carried out by the Whitewater Company's combat team, and the troops led by Li Feng, was to wipe out these fish that escaped the net on these mineral planets. The problem was that these Imperium soldiers who survived the space storm in the pursuit of the Federal Fleet usually possessed extremely terrifying individual strength. They were not easy to deal with. The survival rate of big fish, small fish, and shrimps ultimately depended on the size and density of the holes in the fishing net that the fishermen weaved. The 2 torsional voids, the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor, strictly put the simple philosophical proposition into practice. They allowed the information fragments that wandered between mass and energy to pass through their body freely without reacting at all. That was why the Imperium was able to remotely control the lone expeditionary army outside of 7 years. Although the transmission of military intelligence between the 2 was difficult, it had never been cut off. In fact, in the center of the highly centralized civilization in the outer left star sector, in the tallest building in the capital of planet Tianjing, there was a person who could even watch the Federation's television news. Of course, compared to the transmission of information with a purpose, this kind of reverse information reception was much more difficult. Although the signals of images and sounds were not destroyed in the turbulence of the space channel, they had become extremely weak. To reassemble such weak signals and send them through the information accelerator to travel through the universe where even light felt distant, the Imperium had expended a large amount of resources and energy. Therefore, other than the Imperial Military Department and the Royal Intelligence Bureau, which were responsible for monitoring the movements of the Federation, only one person among the countless ministers and citizens in the vast Imperium could watch these news programs. In the center of the Empire's Tianjing planet, there was a majestic plaza in the center of countless wide high-grade roads. However, compared to the endless ancient buildings behind it, this plaza seemed ordinary and small. This building complex was the Imperial Palace of the Imperium. For tens of thousands of years, this Imperial Palace had enjoyed the worship of countless planets in the left star sector. It had mercilessly absorbed the blood and sweat of hundreds of millions of citizens, accumulating hundreds of millions of wealth. This was the reason why it was so imposing and innumerable buildings. In the depths of the imperial palace, a slightly gloomy palace-style skyscraper rose from the ground and pierced straight into the sky. Together with the continuous development of the dark-colored buildings that covered the entire capital city like a carpet, it was like a sharp sword that drove the subjects on the ground to ask the universe who was the real master. The grandeur was vast and awe-inspiring. In the early years of the Imperium, the famous fleet commander Reger, on a journey back to planet Tianjing, looked at the eye-catching green buildings in the center of the planet from tens of thousands of kilometers away. He had once lamented that this was probably the most magnificent achievement of human civilization that could be seen with the naked eye in the universe. At that time, the Imperium did not know that there were other humans in this part of the universe, and that there was even a deformed society called the Federation. However, even many years later, if the Federation and the Imperium were to be counted, this imperial palace on planet Tianjing was still the most awe-inspiring building. If one could look down at the imperial palace from a low altitude, the visual impact would definitely be greater. However, for tens of thousands of years, no aircraft had ever dared to fly near the imperial palace. There was also no building on this planet that dared to exceed the height of the sword-like building in the imperial palace. This was because Her Majesty was in the imperial palace. Her Majesty was in Zhaixing Lu. The architectural design of Zhaixing Lu was actually very simple. The bottom floor was as empty as the wilderness, and there were only countless giant pillars supporting it and automated transportation equipment. However, on the top 3 floors of the building, there was a palace that was so luxurious that it was difficult to look at it directly. It was called the Suspended Palace. The violent wind outside the Suspended Palace, after passing through those seemingly weak but actually endowed with high-tech gauze curtains, turned into a leisurely breeze, causing the people living inside to spontaneously feel as if they were riding the wind. They were so happy that they even wanted to pluck the stars from the sky. However, the servants and palace maids did not dare to have any such intoxicated expressions. They humbly maintained a smile and kept their heads down, not daring to look at the situation in the soft couch at the back of the palace. The lighting in the palace was very dim. A young man in a military uniform was half kneeling in front of a screen. His face could not be seen clearly, but his figure was slightly thin and did not look like a strong and powerful soldier of the Imperium. On the screen was a brilliant oil painting of sunflowers, reflecting a shadow. The shadow was raising his hand to rub his head, as if he was complaining endlessly. The group of trash of the news inspection department. In fact, they should watch more of the Federation's programs. This was a middle-aged man wearing a large robe. His voice was calm and ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. However, when it fell into the ears of people, it made people feel unusually cold and frightened. The young soldier in front of the screen lowered his head and said in a clear voice, "Understood." The middle-aged man sat on the couch and did not turn his head. Just the back of his figure gave off a suffocating feeling of oppression. He looked at the news conference on the screen and looked at the cute little girl with purple hair. He was silent, as if he wanted to find some memories from her eyes, and he also wanted to find some stories from the bracelet on her hand. His slender fingers stroked the harp beside him, and the low sound of the harp came from behind the screen again, immediately disturbing the sound of the harp. "Huai Chaoshi." The young soldier in front of the screen answered in a clear voice, "Yes. Go and tell that useless uncle of yours. If he insists on letting your even more useless uncle carry out that useless mission, then let him be. I can't be bothered with him." The voice behind the screen said indifferently, "Let Umburi and those guys who are vacationing in a foreign land take back the bracelet on this girl's hand. Capture her or kill her." The young soldier in front of the screen stiffened slightly. He lowered his head and said, "I've already applied to follow the previous mission in secret. Although the risk is high, I've been there once and still came back alive. I believe in your ability." The middle-aged man behind the screen said sadly, "It's a pity that my dear brother will never come back. Prince Delin will definitely be immortal." The soldier named Huai Chaoshi replied softly. Among all his uncles, only the one who had died in the Federation and whom he had never seen before was worthy of respect. "Yes, eat," the man behind the screen ordered. White Saoshur's body stiffened again. He stood up with some difficulty, walked behind the screen and picked up a thorn. He lowered his head and stood behind the middle-aged man. A servant had already placed the food on the table. The middle-aged man raised his chopsticks. Huai Chaoshur viciously whipped the thorn in his hand. The thorn fell, and a bloody wound appeared on the middle-aged man's back. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten about the revenge of killing your father?" He grunted in pain, gripped his chopsticks tightly, and replied coldly, "I haven't forgotten." Another thorn viciously whipped down. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten about your brother who left home when he was young?" "No." Slap. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten about the bloodline of the royal family?" "No." A clear voice of reproach sounded in the tallest palace of the Empire's imperial palace. The sound of the thorn hitting the body and the painful reply came one after another from behind the screen. Chapter 400. Does His Majesty not know that this could be a bait? The young officer walked along the path covered with an expensive alpaca blanket and walked out of Zhaixing Tower. He didn't turn back to look at the awe-inspiring Zhaixing Hall. His heart carried a trace of indescribable doubt and uneasiness. Huai Chaoshur. It was said that when His Majesty was naming him, he happened to read a line of poetry. Nostalgia is a line of scribbled poetry. For some reason, His Majesty was deeply moved. From then on, this name had followed him as he grew up day by day. Compared to other Empire soldiers, Huai Chaoshur was on the shorter side. His body was slightly thin, but he didn't feel weak. His military uniform didn't have epaulets to indicate his rank, but the close-fitting cut of his slender body fully displayed the lines of strength hidden in each step he took. Although Huai Chaoshur didn't know why the Federation was so certain that the nation's maiden could move His Majesty so much, he naturally couldn't be sure that this was a trap. However, his military intuition cultivated on the battlefield still made him feel a strong sense of unease. But so what if it was a bait? His Majesty didn't care at all. Whether it was the expeditionary army alone in the Westwoods or the palace maids in the glorious royal palace, they were all his people. Thinking of the true anger hidden in His Majesty's calm expression, Huai Saoshur's thin eyebrows raised slightly. He was sure that His Majesty didn't care at all about the heavy price the expeditionary army would have to pay in order to quell the anger that came out of nowhere. Huai Chaoshur had never doubted His Majesty's ability. Back when His Majesty was still Prince Norton, he didn't hesitate to take the risk and force his way through the space tunnel in the Jelly Corridor just to go to Bermuda and personally awaken the brother hidden in the Federation to complete the huge plan left behind by the great teacher. This kind of thing wasn't something that a normal noble of the royal family could do. Huai Chaoshur stood on the self-propelled track and looked coldly at the entrance to the underground military building in front of the palace. She thought about the uncle in charge of military affairs and thought that if he were to go through the space tunnel, he would probably immediately get the sanatorium to issue him with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Even with Huai Saoshur's identity, he still had to go through a strict security check before he could enter the underground building of the military headquarters. However, when he walked through the long security check door, the officer in charge of the check immediately destroyed all the scanned images. In the process of destroying them, they didn't even dare to look at the images. His Majesty's orders. In the most secure room in the Empire's military headquarters, Huai Chaoshur handed over an electronic signature. She looked at Prince Bo Wu behind the office desk and said in a deep voice, "Also, His Majesty said that if that guy who only knows how to whip the warriors to vent his anger wants to carry out his first transmigration mission, he can go as he pleases. However, I have to follow him." Prince Bo Wu was the brother of the emperor and had been in charge of the military headquarters for more than 10 years. As the most powerful military minister of the empire, he looked at the young officer in front of the desk without any arrogance on his face. He even deliberately explained in a gentle tone, "You also know that although some of the data of the space tunnel has been deciphered, it is still too little. Keaton is indeed reckless and competitive, but he has a lot of experience in leading troops. He is more suitable to carry out this kind of first transmigration mission. Also, if you are injured, how can I explain it to His Majesty? But he is also His Majesty's brother and my uncle." Although I insist that transmigration in such a short period of time won't help the situation at the front line, since the military headquarters insisted, I have to follow. I can't just watch him get killed by the Federation soldiers. After saying this, Huai Chaoshi coldly saluted and turned to leave. After Huai Chaoshi left, Prince Bo Wu was in a daze behind his luxurious desk for a long time before he woke up. He didn't mind Keaton's impoliteness because Keaton was the son of His Majesty, and Keaton had absolutely terrifying strength to support his indifference. What made him dazed was His Majesty's electronic signature. Such a completely unreasonable military operation was very likely to cause the death of 1/3 of the Imperial Expeditionary Force. What was His Majesty thinking? After a minute, he walked out of the office with a cold face. He successfully digested the shock and returned to his role as the military minister. He passed His Majesty's order to his subordinates and forwarded it to the distant Imperial Expeditionary Force. He himself took the high-speed elevator and came to the hall at the bottom of the military headquarters. Countless military officers were busy in the hall. The computing power of the military headquarters of the Empire was far inferior to the old things in the Federation. The entire hall was filled with the sound of orders, and it was slightly chaotic. Prince Bai Wu looked at everything in front of him with a cold face. He had forgotten about the strange military order of His Majesty, because in the past few years, he had spent most of his energy on the 3 most important missions of the Empire, and the hall in front of him was dealing with one of them. Prince Keaton's direct command fleet has already followed the order, and will arrive at the designated area in about a month. The fleet has been asking when the portal will be opened. A major general of the Empire came to Prince Bo Wu's side and said in a low voice. Prince Bo Wu frowned and thought about what Huai Chaoshi said. Keaton was a brave man, but sometimes he was too impulsive, barbaric, and bloodthirsty. Was it too careless to let him carry out such an important transmigration mission? It's just an experimental transmigration. Do you think he dares to kill his way to the capital ring of the Federation? Prince Bo Wu said sarcastically. Send an encrypted message to him again. We can only calculate the data curve of the portal within 7 days. If he is really so happy in the Federation star system that he forgets to go home, then he will be captured by the Federation. The Major General nodded. Prince Bo Wu looked at the busy military officers in the hall with a cold face and felt the pressure and majesty that made him very happy. He enjoyed the taste of war and felt a little regretful. It was a pity that the hero's brother didn't have time to get all the data of the portal. What he sent back 5 years ago was only fragments. Yes, in the hall at the bottom of the Empire's military building, an extremely important project was being carried out. Countless scientists were involved in it, trying to study the data of the portal according to the relevant data that Macklin sent back to the Empire a few years ago. Unfortunately, until today, the biggest progress they made was to calculate the activity pattern of the 2 portals filled with storms in a short period of time. Once the fleet entered the portal, it would cause a large disturbance to the environment of the portal, and the data model would enter an irreversible range. More importantly, they didn't know if the Federation had the ability to affect the portal. It looks good, but it doesn't have a decisive effect on this war. Prince Bo Wu thought angrily. Other than the critical 7 days, the research of the military scientists couldn't break through the upper limit of quality. In other words, even if the research was successful, the Empire could only send a medium-sized fleet through the portal again and again. That was equivalent to letting the Federation eat away at their own strength. One day we will attack the home of these invaders. Prince Bo Wu opened his mouth slightly and said coldly. At this time, the Major General beside him received a phone call. A hint of excitement appeared in the Major General's eyes. He looked up and said to Prince Bo Wu, Your Royal Highness, regarding this experimental transmigration, maybe, we have a very good hunting target. Back in the office, Prince Bo Wu looked at the report that was jointly obtained by the military and the Royal Intelligence Agency. His face showed a hint of disbelief. He said in a deep voice, The key is the source. I never thought that the military and the Royal Intelligence Agency would be able to get information from the Federation. The head of the Royal Intelligence Agency rubbed his hands excitedly and answered quickly. The information came from Bermuda. It was a direct contact. The source is a hero. His physiological markers have been confirmed. There is absolutely no problem. Hero. This was a great name that was used so much that it was tiresome. But Prince Bo Wu's eyes lit up. Because the Empire's Hero Project was the seed project in the eyes of the Federation government. Prince Bo Wu narrowed his eyes and said sternly, "It has been many years since he was awakened. Especially when the Federation recently discovered this project. How did he awaken on his own?" His Majesty once gave Prince Doring an awakening list. There are not many heroes on the list. Most of them have been identified and arrested by the Federation Bureau of Proclamation. But he is the one who hides the deepest. The head of the Royal Intelligence Agency explained, "The most important reason is that he works in the military's intelligence department. This is very helpful for him to hide himself." No wonder he was able to know the top-secret schedule of the federal military. Prince Bai Wu said, "Verify the intelligence. If it's correct, let him continue to lurk. Other than the few people on Master Fan's core list, he's probably our only compatriot in the Federation. A mere supply fleet is not worth his sacrifice." Prince Bo Wu coldly looked at the high-ranking officers in the room. His dark brown eyes flashed with a hint of cruelty. He said in a deep voice, "Let him know the top-secret schedule of the federal military as soon as possible." The high-ranking officers in the room were shocked. They did not understand what he meant. Only the Major General who accompanied Prince Bo Wu to inspect the hall at the bottom level thought of something. Let County King Carlton's fleet slow down. Postpone the test of crossing the space tunnel indefinitely. Prince Bo Wu stood up and said coldly, "In order to give the Federation a surprise gift, we have to make sure that when the first fleet passes through the space tunnel, we will cause them unbearable losses." The officers in the room slowly came to their senses. The head of the Royal Intelligence Agency asked with a trembling voice, "The target of the surprise attack? Who should we target? If Li Pifu is going to the Westwoods, that would be the best. But that old guy only knows how to hide at home like a turtle." Prince Bo Wu said coldly, "Other than him, there is only the tiger in the Westwoods. The Empire's research on the space tunnel could only allow a mid-sized fleet to make a round trip in 7 days. Unless they wanted to give up on that fleet." Just like what Prince Bo Wu said before, this kind of result looked good in the war between the two forces, but in reality it had no strategic significance. But everything was changed because of that seed. If they knew the top-secret schedule of the federal military, 7 days, a mid-sized fleet seemed to be able to complete a bloody surprise attack that the Federation would never expect. Chapter 401. The upper echelons of the Imperial Army had drafted a grand and sinister plan for a long time. That night, the plan was approved by the Emperor. Thus, all the officers in the underground building of the Imperial Army started to carry out complicated tactical simulations. They had to make sure that this bloody surprise attack was flawless, even if it was just a possibility. Thinking about the impact the surprise attack would have on the universe and the endless humiliation and pain it would bring to the people of the Federation, the staff officers of the Imperial Army were so excited that their eyes turned red and their bodies trembled. Naturally, they forgot about the other urgent military order that the Imperial Army had received that day. But after that, they immediately remembered that the expeditionary force far away in the Federation's territory had been ordered by the Imperial Palace. Instantly, their hearts trembled. From the Minister of Military Affairs to the lowest-ranking staff officers, no one dared to underestimate the Emperor's orders. They didn't want to see the Empire's last fortress in the Federation's territory fall apart, and they didn't want to see the Emperor explode in anger because of this. The frequency of information transmission between Tianjing and the 3 star systems at the edge of the Federation's Westwoods was suddenly encrypted. The Imperial Army's General Staff Office started to have intensive discussions with the military leaders of the Expeditionary Force to make strategic arrangements for the Expeditionary Force to attack the planet's southern hemisphere. For the past 20 years, the Imperial Expeditionary Force's main strategy had been to defend the 2.5 star systems under their control and wait for reinforcements. They would act as a nail to wedge into the Federation's territory and preserve as much of their strength as possible when it was obvious that they wouldn't be able to expand their victory. They would restrain the federal military's large forces and buy time for the Empire's great counterattack. With just a few words from the Emperor, the Expeditionary Force had to give up on their established and effective strategy. Just for the sake of a young female Federation star, they had to turn out in full force and shed blood. This kind of disregard for the lives of the Expeditionary Force's soldiers really made the officers of the General Staff Office feel cold and confused, but no one dared to say that this was the Emperor's reckless order. General Ambly stood in the snow below the circular base. His sparse beard was covered in frost from the heat. He quietly looked at the encrypted electronic document and thought to himself, "Your Majesty, this is a random order, but I don't think any of the officials would dare to object." The old general looked back at the magnificent and cold glacier behind the base and felt a slight chill. All the belongings of the Maple Forest Formation were hidden there. Were they going to throw everything in for the national girl of the Federation? He could not understand the Emperor's military orders, but he would carry them out without question. He would not drag his feet. On one hand, it was because of his supreme reverence for the Emperor. On the other hand, it was because his family was still far away in his hometown. Is it to stop this concert from going on and strike a blow to the Federation's confidence, or is it because of something else? Old General Ambly's eyes sunk as he thought to himself, the people in the South must have been prepared. The concert is definitely not a good time. His judgment was not wrong. The big shots of the federal military were not a bunch of idiots. They dared to agree to Jian Shui's request and let her enter the real front line to hold a concert for the military. Naturally, they knew how dangerous this matter was. The Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere had already entered a state of alert. What was even more frightening was that the Federation's medium-sized fleet had been patrolling in space, coldly suppressing the planet's firepower line. This fleet had escorted Jian Shui and her group into Huiming Corridor and had not retreated. Other than angering the Federation, what good is it for the Empire to pay such a high price to kill that young female celebrity? General Ambly quietly thought to himself. Then he ordered the Norman officer in a hoarse voice, "The General Staff Headquarters has an emergency meeting to discuss this matter. For the sake of the Emperor's word, they had to fight, and they had to win." At the very least, General Ambly was very sure that this was definitely not a trap set by the Federation. General Ambly believed that his counterparts in the federal military had been retarded, naive, and stupid decades ago. However, after so many years of war, and Li Pifu had brought up an entire generation of outstanding generals, the current federal military staff would not use such petty and childish methods. More importantly, even he, who had been on the battlefield for many years, could not think of any benefits for his Maple Forest alliance to go to the south to hunt down that young female celebrity. This proved that no matter how much Jian Shui was doted on by the Federation, she was still just a celebrity. She had no strategic value and was not qualified to be bait on the battlefield. This was a very simple logical inference. Since there was no reason for her to be bait, the theory of a trap was naturally not valid. The people in the South have been continuously increasing their troops in the past few months. They should be preparing for something big. This concert may be the publicity for this big move. General Ambly held his teacup like an ordinary old man. He slowly said to his subordinates in a hoarse voice, "Since we are going to fight, of course we can't just focus on that celebrity. We have to win and we have to beat their momentum." The old general slowly raised his head. His somewhat cloudy eyes suddenly lit up. He swept his gaze across the faces of the officers in the room one by one. In a deep voice he said, "The orders from the military are only to kill or capture the target, but I think the Maple Forest Alliance can do more." The officers in the command room saw the sudden brilliance in the old man's face. They quickly stood up and saluted. Since they were going to attack with all their strength, it was not worth it to just complete the mission given by the Emperor. The Imperial Expeditionary Force would definitely not be satisfied with this. They wanted to take advantage of the situation and vent their resentment and hatred for the Federation for many years. This did not violate the orders of the military. In fact, perhaps their comrades in the distant homeland also hoped that they would have such courage and courage. General Ambly slowly stood up and placed his teacup on the table. He looked at his subordinates who were standing upright and said, "The General Staff Headquarters will draft the battle plan as soon as possible. The Alliance will mobilize. I only have one request. The battle plan must be reported quickly." In the cruel interweaving battle on the planet's surface, The Empire and the Federal Army had long known each other's depth. General Ambly's request for quickly was exceptionally accurate and pointed out the main point of this attack. Although the southern side of the planet still had the Federation's electronic surveillance network, this planet was once completely occupied by the Imperial Expeditionary Force. No one knew how many nodes set up by the Bureau of Proclamation many years ago had been destroyed. The Federation had only reclaimed the southern hemisphere for a dozen years. It was impossible to restore the glory of the Charter in such a short period of time. This was where the Imperial Expeditionary Force's confidence came from. As long as they were fast enough and entered the battlefield at the right time, the Expeditionary Force was confident that they could openly suppress the people in the south and catch them off guard. Even if the broken charter could see them, they would not be able to mobilize troops in time to respond. It was like the thunderstorm night in the southern hemisphere during summer. Lightning flashed in the night sky like snakes. You knew that after the flash of light, there would be a rumble of thunder, but you could not react at all. You could only watch, wait, and slowly cover your ears. 40 minutes later, under the control of the Imperial Expeditionary Force in the northern hemisphere of 5,460, 17 mountain-style military airfields were activated at the same time. Countless black dots of miniature drones buzzed as they took off, flew over the glaciers and forests, and flew towards the south. The Moonwolf Group, which was the best at long-distance raids, began to overcharge. The electronic troops under the command of the Expeditionary Army could not avoid the monitoring of the radiance of the Charter, but they used methods that had been hidden all along. They cleverly passed through the remaining civil communication lines underground, and began to attempt to hack into a broadcasting relay station that had just arrived on this planet. It was the concert broadcasting equipment of the Federation television. All of this was to prepare for the upcoming war. The Expeditionary Force had to do everything possible to confirm the location of Jian Shuair. Although the Expeditionary Force headquarters had more long-term plans, they had to first satisfy the Emperor's request while fiercely attacking the Federal Army in the south. Old General Ambly and a few officers silently stood on the observation tower of the circular base, looking at the glaciers behind the base. A huge alloy door suddenly appeared in the middle of the glaciers. Countless self-driving mechanical tanks and fighter jets slowly drove out of the underground base with a murderous aura. They came out of the ice and snow so naturally, they carried with them a sense of ice and snow. The same scene was happening at the foot of countless glaciers in the northern hemisphere. The three most powerful mechanical brigades of the Maple Forest Alliance would all be thrown into this absurd war that was destined to go down in history. Although the battle on this planet was only the prelude to this magnificent war, it was still a battle that was destined to go down in history. Old General Ambly calmly looked at the rumbling tanks under his feet that crushed through the ice and the fighter jets that were undergoing pre-battle inspection. His old heart was unprecedentedly full and healthy. A general could only release his brilliance on the battlefield. On this planet far away from home, other than the flying artillery, what else could dispel the terrible loneliness? But even at this moment, he still didn't forget the Emperor's strict order. He muttered to himself, "Little girl, even if you want to hide or run, I will make sure you have nowhere to go. You can only walk into the place I want you to go." The old general firmly believed that once the attack began, the Federation's national girl would definitely not be able to board a battleship and leave this lonely planet where it was difficult for her to return home. This was because 2 hours ago, the last and strongest fleet of the Empire's Expeditionary Army left behind at Westwood's border was silently sailing towards the star sector where Planet 5460 was located. The air quality of Planet 5460 was extremely good. It was unusually clear, even more transparent than the atmosphere of the administrative planet of the West Woods. The people who walked out of the battleships couldn't help but look up at the blue sky. Most of them were from the capital ring, and they had never seen such a clear sky in their lives. Sulu took off his sunglasses and squinted at the faintly visible Federation battleships above his head. He couldn't help but be shocked by the vastness of his field of vision. In his mind, he began to suspect the real reason why these battleships didn't leave. The Federal fleet had always patrolled in the middle space of the star system. Patrolling in low space like this required them to resist the huge gravitational force of the planet. The energy consumption was not something the current Federation was willing to bear. What's wrong? Jian Shui'er walked down from the black car and asked curiously. Sulu lowered his head, put on his sunglasses again and explained, "It's the first time I've seen such a clear sky. I'm not used to it. I feel a little nervous." Chapter 402. There were not many officers who came to Zaichou's military spaceport to participate in the small welcoming ceremony. Sulu stood below the stage and looked at the soldiers through his sunglasses. He thought that compared to the momentum created on the Westwood's administrative planet, the officers on this planet did not seem to care much about the victory concert. The frontline command headquarters actually only sent a major general. Most of the Federal Army stationed in the southern hemisphere of Planet 5460 were directly subordinate troops of the Westwood's military district. There were only 2 divisions of troops from the capital ring who came to participate in the rotational battle. The frontline command headquarters led the military operations of the entire planet, so at least 1 lieutenant general was available. Sulu did not think that this was the military ignoring the performance team. Instead, he thought that the generals in the headquarters were probably busy with something important. The aftermath of the news could not be calmed down. Although this was the absolute frontier and absolute frontline, the soldiers still knew of Suli's existence through the television and the internet. The soldiers in the formation listened to the unoriginal welcome speech on the rostrum and looked at the national girl on the stage excitedly. Many of them also looked at Sulu curiously. This young man who didn't seem to have any abnormalities was that guy from the legends. The sunglasses covered Suli's eyes. He did not care about the strange looks around him. Under the cover of the sunglasses, no one knew that he, who was silent with his hands behind his back, was actually having a direct communication with a great being. A faint light appeared in his left eye. The old man did not seem to like to appear in his mind with the face of the old butler. Instead, he used the light talismans to communicate with him directly. "I think this is a big deal, but I don't know when the Department of Defense will tell the truth about the mission." Sulu thought in his mind, "I'm carrying out a military mission. If something really happens to the concert, you have to help me. I can't let anything happen to Jian Shui'er." The glory of the charter was an invisible existence, but in his left eye, rows of characters could be seen with the naked eye. A row of characters flashed. The electronic monitoring network in the northern hemisphere has been completely destroyed. Less than 2% is left. It is unable to support the overall monitoring calculation. The southern hemisphere is 47% complete. The overall monitoring calculation can be attempted. Can I know what the DoD is doing in secret? You don't have the authority in this area, but I think you will receive a new mission soon. Sulu understood what he meant. He stood silently in the sunshine of Zaichou Airport. According to the old man, as long as he stayed in the southern hemisphere, he could protect himself and Jian Shui'er no matter what the people of the Empire in the north did or what the Department of National Defense secretly planned. After the simple welcome ceremony, the concert team left Zaichou Airport with the guidance vehicle and military police sent by the frontline command and headed north. The further north they went, the hotter they felt. The clear sky outside the black car seemed like it could burn up at any time. Jian Shui'er sat in the back with her eyes wide open. She looked at the wreckage of fighter jets that could often be seen on both sides of the road, and the armored vehicles that had been burned into black soil. Her clear eyes did not burn, but there was a faint sadness in them. In the following journey, Jian Shui'er, accompanied by military officials, came to the third hospital of the planet to visit the wounded soldiers who were receiving treatment. The soldiers who were seriously injured on the battlefield would be transported back to the main planet of the Westwoods for treatment. But because of the limited transport capacity, a large number of the wounded were still receiving treatment on the spot. They would be transferred after their condition stabilized. In the intensive care ward of the sterile space on the second floor, there were many soldiers who were permanently disabled. Some of them had their legs blown off by anti-infantry mines. Some of them had their arms cut off by high-speed rotating bullets scattered by the Empire mecha, and some of them had most of their skin burned by the incendiary bombs dropped from the sky. Jian Shui'er, who was wearing a light blue sterile suit, did not just say a few words of encouragement to the soldiers and leave the hospital. Instead, she sat quietly beside the bed and began to talk to the seriously injured soldiers. The national girl came to his side. Her clear voice was filled with sunshine, bringing warmth and comfort to these soldiers who had suffered heavy blows. The gloomy and even somewhat desperate atmosphere in the ward changed a lot because of her arrival. Jian Shuer softly sang a song for them. She turned her head and said cutely, "I'm so useless." When he said this, even the second lieutenant, who had 70% of his burn area, laughed. It was just that his heavily injured face hadn't had time to undergo skin grafting and muscle regeneration surgery, so he looked abnormally terrifying. Especially when he laughed, one could actually see the pink muscle fibers on his left cheek and the white teeth that were exposed in the air. Not everyone dared to look at this face. Most of the team members who came to visit the wounded stayed away from this bed. Sister Tong had a look of pity on her face as she quietly stood behind. Only Jian Shuer sat beside him, and Sulu stood behind her. Sulu watched silently. He did not know how many people he had killed in his life and how many bloody and cruel scenes he had seen. But when he looked at a severely burned soldier, he still felt cold and numb in his heart. However, he did not see a trace of disgust on Jian Shuer's pink cheeks. What impressed him even more was that the national girl did not show any expression of pity. She just smiled cutely, as if the burned soldier on the bed was an extremely ordinary person. Not far behind the 3rd Military Hospital was the graveyard. After the news reporter finished filming the scene of Jian Shuer offering flowers to the hero's cemetery, he was politely asked to leave. In the green grassland, Sulu walked slowly with Jian Shuer. He saw that the girl's eyes were already wet. For decades, in order to resist the invasion of the empire, countless young and hot-blooded people had been buried here. Only close to 4,000 of these soldiers were buried in this cemetery. However, as far as the eye could see, all one could see were black tombstones in the gentle green grassland. They didn't seem like lush trees, but rather like black gems scattered throughout the grassland. Looking at this scene, there was no fear of death in the hearts of the two of them. There was only a faint sadness and respect. Jian Shuer turned around. Her big eyes were full of a strong smile and tears that she had not had time to wipe away. She said, "Many people died for victory. If we do something for this, it is very reasonable, right?" "Yes, so you have to hold a victory concert." It was not as simple as a concert. Although the old man insisted on maintaining his authority and did not tell Sulu the top-secret military information, he was sure that his deduction would not be wrong through his own observations these days. Leaving the hospital and the cemetery, he entered the frontline military camp. Looking at the multi-level automatic farms watered by water droplets, and listening to the sounds of cards in the barracks around him that were filled with West Woods accents, Sulu was slightly stunned. He felt as if he had returned to the training base. The sun here was so bright that he really did not feel the tension of an impending war. Turning around the barracks, there were countless soldiers on the field undergoing close combat training under the scorching sun. Battle cries shook the sky. Although armed infantrymen rarely had the chance to meet the Empire soldiers, the soldiers of the Federation had never forgotten the bloodlust that close combat training could bring to them. The camouflage military uniforms had long been rubbed by the dirt and stones. The soldiers' bodies fell heavily on the hard ground, and then they climbed up resolutely. The battle cries and the orderly landing of the soldiers soared into the sky. It was so exciting that the people in the convoy were thirsty. The earth trembled slightly. 7 black M52 mechas walked out from behind the barracks. The heavy mechas towered over the canopy of the trees. They moved silently in the wind, as if they were returning home. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Sulu finally smiled when he saw this scene. Being on the front line, he could truly confirm that he was indeed very used to this kind of battlefield atmosphere. Even his body was beginning to itch. Jian Shuer in the back saw the sunny smile on his face. Thinking that the Ministry of Defense would probably not hand over the mission to Group 7 until after the concert, she asked curiously, "What are you thinking about?" Sulu smiled, revealing a mouthful of healthy white teeth. He said, "I'm thinking that no matter what might happen at the concert, no matter what the Ministry of Defense wants me to do. But if those Empire people really dare to come to the south, this young master will definitely make them regret it a little." The convoy entered the base. The MX Mecha that had been closely guarded was transferred into the heavily guarded warehouse. The concert was set for 2 days later. The relevant technical installation and rehearsals would begin tonight. The concert broadcast organization had already arrived at Planet 5460 10 days ago. The concert stage had already been set up. All that was left was for the engineers and Jian Shui's team to perform the final adjustments. Of course, the broadcast organization for the Victory concert could only be the Federation television station. From the age of 12, Jian Shui had cooperated with the Federation television station for all of her drama interviews and concert broadcasts. The two parties had cooperated countless times and were already very familiar with each other. Su Lu stood behind Jian Shui. Seeing her smiling and greeting every staff member of the television station with a friendly and cute smile, an inexplicable sense of pride welled up in his heart. This was the uncle's daughter, the dream lover of his adolescence. She was indeed worthy of his love. However, no one noticed that at the side of the concert venue, the pulse balancing system of the high-power signal relay station had a momentary imbalance. It seemed that some kind of external signal was invading. It's a pity that we can't go and see the grand scene of the concert with our own eyes. Logically speaking, the rehearsal tonight should have given our fleet some signal. In the command hall of the Federal Fleet's flagship outside the planet's atmosphere, a middle-aged commander held a cup of coffee and looked at the brightly colored planet under his feet and said emotionally, "This Federation medium-sized fleet was composed of the Sinew series battleships." The commander of the fleet was a female major general in her 40s, Hong Yujing. She was the sister of the commander of the Federal Fleet, Hong Yuliang. Major General Hong Yuliang smiled and said, "The concert will be broadcasted to the entire Federation the day after tomorrow. We will be able to see it all the same." Her deputy commander suddenly frowned and asked in a low voice, "Wasting so much energy and leaving the fleet here just to ensure the smooth performance of a concert? I don't know what the Department of Defense is thinking when they spend so much energy." Major General Hong Yujing looked at him quietly and said with a smile, "Because this is a concert called Victory." Chapter 403. Major General Hong Yujing didn't explain further to her deputy, because the secret military order was only passed to officers at her level, and it wasn't announced to the lower ranks. The Federation set up such a trap for the Imperial Expeditionary Force, so naturally, they didn't want to reveal any flaws from top to bottom. In fact, even she didn't know why the Ministry of Defense came up with such a plan. This plan seemed a bit naive and stupid. Would the Imperial Expeditionary Force really lose their mind and give up the defensive strategy that the enemy had persisted for more than a decade just because of that national girl? From her sister, General Hong Yuliang, she even knew that when President Pabre passed this military plan called the Victory Concert, he still didn't understand where the Ministry of Defense's confidence came from. However, in the end, President Prabal still made up his mind and passed this military plan. Just like the respectable president, Captain Hong Yujing did not understand, but she accepted it without any resistance. She also made meticulous tactical deductions and preparations for the upcoming war. Because this plan came from the old man beside Feiqing Lake. To the senior generals of the federal government and the military, the old man had long since taken off his martial uniform and returned to the lake. However, in the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, he once again stood up. What kind of inconceivable yet incomparably exciting news was this? The universe had been peaceful for too long, and the Federation had been waiting for too long. They couldn't tolerate the Empire's expeditionary force on their own land anymore. When the god of war made his move, the world was in chaos. No one knew why the wise and powerful old man forced this military plan, but everyone in the Federation firmly believed that under the wise leadership of the god of war, they would definitely win. Major General Hong Yujing knew that the mission of her fleet was to cover Jian Shui's departure, but she also knew that if the Imperial Expeditionary Force really attacked, that old Foxumbury would definitely not miss her. But could the Imperial Expeditionary Force calculate that the Federation spent a few months to set up a diversion just to bury a surprise force there? She looked at the planet below the porthole of the battleship. She looked at the light yellow mountain range at the intersection of white and green on the surface of the planet. She smiled and smoothed the wrinkles on her forehead. Looking from space, the mountain range looked pale yellow. But in reality, you would find that the mountain range was a deep brownish yellow. Other than a few green plants on the mountainside, the entire mountain range was barren. There was no trace of life and it was lonely. Therefore, the highest peak in the mountain range was called the Lonely Mountain Range. That's the Lonely Mountain Range. Behind us is the Yellow Mountain Range. A few months ago at the training base, you should understand what it means by now. Behind a giant sunken rock, Du Shaoqing, the commander of the Iron 7th Division of the Federation's 3rd Military Region, coldly looked at the surroundings and said to Shimanjin, who was standing behind him, "You came later than the troops, so take the time to familiarize yourself with the tactical plan." "Yes, teacher." Shimanjin had just arrived at Planet 5460 not long ago. He was not wearing a military hat today, and his slightly dry black hair swayed in the dry wind of the Yellow Mountains. The Ministry of National Defense has prepared for so long, and even let the key military officers to cooperate with our maneuver to improve our understanding of this ambush. If we still can't win this battle, all of you will go back to S3 to be clerks, Du Shaoqing said coldly. All the military officers behind him had serious expressions. They all stood at attention and said in a deep voice, "We will complete the mission." Behind this group of military officers, countless firepower equipment suitable for mountainous warfare were undergoing the final adjustment and camouflage. Behind the artillery position, some large equipment was covered with dark yellow camouflage cloth. It was hard to tell what it was, but it looked like it was a mecha. The entire Iron 7th Division was now distributed between the Yellow Mountain Range and the Silent Mountain Range. However, with so many people and so many equipment, they did not make any noise or leave any traces on the mountain road. The tactical quality of the division was fully demonstrated during this preparation process. The results of the Ministry of National Defense's tactical deduction are out. A staff officer walked behind Du Shaoqing and said in a low voice. Then, with a pull of his hands, he opened the scroll-like electronic map and quickly operated with his hands, marking the places that needed attention. He explained to him and the officers around him, whether it's a feint or a full-scale attack, since the Department of Defense has determined that the other party is the target, we can't do anything. Then the opponent must attack Zaiqiu Airport before the warship takes off, thus forcing the target to move west from the concert location and leave the planet through Luoqiu Airport. The Yellow Mountain Range is the only route they have to pass through. Just to confuse our line of sight, there will definitely be a full-force attack on the line of demarcation. The opponent may not use a lot of power to carry out a surprise attack, but until now, the Ministry of National Defense has not determined how much power the Empire will put into this route. Outside of the Wolf Moon Mecha Brigade, how much firepower will there be? I don't want to know how many troops the Empire will send. Du Shaoqing looked at the ambush position under his feet and lightly waved his black lambskin gloves. He said with a rare emotion, "Since we are back, we can only leave with victory many years ago." This planet was the place where the Iron 7th Division had been reborn. During the Second Federal Defense War, the Iron 7th Division had single-handedly completed an inconceivable task of stopping 3 of the Empire's integrated brigades, buying precious time for the Federation's main forces to surround them. However, the Iron 7th Division had paid the price of being almost completely annihilated. The Iron 7th Division won glory in the end, but they did not receive the respect of the federal military. This was because the Veterans Association and the media who promoted the Iron 7th Division's achievements did not know the story behind that tragic attack. In that defensive battle decades ago, the previous commander and senior officers of the 7th Division missed the opportunity and were cowardly, causing a fatal strategic flaw to appear in the military's plan. The situation was very critical, and their entire division headquarters was surrounded by the Imperial Expeditionary Force. They were forced into a desperate situation, and the 7th Division had no choice but to desperately fight back. The 7th Division, which had suffered countless casualties, made a name for itself and gained the reputation of being the Iron 7th Division. How many people had died in the 3 Imperial regiments because of their once fleeting cowardice? The media and public who did not know the inside story only knew that the division had bravely killed the enemy, and thus promoted them to the position of the Iron 7th Division. How could the big shots in the military who knew the inside story be satisfied? From then on, the glory of the Iron 7th Division was purposely forgotten. Du Shaoqing's father was once a staff officer of the Iron 7th Division. He participated in this cruel defensive battle, and was one of the rare few who survived. However, a few years after Du Shaoqing was born, this officer, who was filled with endless guilt and fear, finally died of depression. Today, the truly reborn Iron 7th Division once again came to this planet that had brought them endless glory and humiliation. They were about to welcome a brand new military history. Du Shaoqing quietly looked at the undulating mountains of the planet and said slowly, "This is the first battle since the Iron 7th Division officially returned to the front lines after decades. This battle must be won." His sunglasses reflected the blue sky of planet 5460 and the yellow mountains. It was a magnificent sight. The highly anticipated concert of the Federation officially began. Whether it was the Capitol Ring, the Westwoods, or even the middle-aged man in the Empire's Tianjin building, everyone sat in their own comfortable seats and began to enjoy the concert either excitedly or silently. I lightly jumped into the river of love in front of me. The passers-by beside you can't compare to the gift box in your hand. Within a radius of 500 kilometers around the military camp in the southern hemisphere, 3 layers of defense were arranged. Countless military aircraft were on standby, and countless mechas were undergoing their final self-checks. The fleet in space was watching this solemnly. However, the purple-haired girl standing on the stage did not know any of this. She just hugged a large microphone, tilted her head slightly, and stood on the graceful stage shrouded in blue light. Facing the darkness below, she hummed softly as if she was murmuring, "I'm sorry. I say, dear, the passers-by beside you wish you a happy new year." The nation's young lady Jian Shuer walked out of the clouds like a little fairy who had just come of age. Her purple hair was combed smoothly with a unique bow. She was as pure and cute as ever. However, her lips were painted bright red today. The red on her lips wasn't like blood, but like the smear of cinnabar on a white silk cloth. It was breathtaking and made the girl's pure face have a hint of the charm of an opera. The song ended. Other than the bright stage, the surroundings were silent. Other than darkness, there was only darkness. Even the sound of the audience's breathing couldn't be heard. Jian Shuer stood on the stage alone and felt the loneliness that belonged only to her. She tilted her head in confusion and thought for a while. Then she smiled sweetly towards the audience and said, "You can applaud now." As if they had received an order, the dark silence below the stage instantly collapsed. Applause and excited cheers instantly broke through the night of 5,460 people. This was the military camp. No matter how excited the Federation soldiers were in front of their dream idol, they still subconsciously maintained the cold silence of a mountain before they woke up from their daze. However, once they started to clap and express their excitement, the originally quiet and dark concert suddenly became a carnival scene. Amidst the thunderous applause, the director turned on the lights that had been deliberately suppressed for a few minutes. Countless beams of light began to madly sweep across the mountainous military camp. This was a rare scene of a simple concert in the Federation, but it was definitely the most enthusiastic and dazzling stage. The group of dancers wearing sky-blue miniskirts walked onto the stage. Under the dazzling lights, Jian Shuer removed the cute butterfly clip and combed the short purple hair on her head into a clump of extremely vigorous wild grass. She stuck out her tongue and walked to the front of the stage in her pretty leather boot. The music started. Jian Shuer looked at the densely packed soldiers below the stage and forced a serious smile. However, she didn't say anything. She just held the big microphone with both hands and lightly lowered her eyelashes. Like a quiet girl in an oil painting, she softly and attentively began to sing. "When I was 12 years old, I became the poor orphan that you all liked very much. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, that little girl with no parents. When I was 14 years old, in your eyes I began to enter the military academy to study. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, the purple-haired girl destined to board the warship. When I was 16 years old, I received a very thin bracelet. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuier, but you don't know what it means to me. On the first day of the 66th year of the constitutional era, I held my first concert. I was very nervous. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuier, but you don't know what kind of bloody rain rained down in the underground parking lot that day. On the 67th year of the constitutional era, I went to the mountainous 4 states, wanting to do my best. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuier, but you don't know how powerless I was in the ashes that day. I am the national girl Jian XX. I am the national girl Jian XX. When I smile, I'm not used to looking back. I'm not gentle. I just want to use my naturally cute smiling face to walk quietly with you. Because I'm just an ordinary girl Jian XX. Fireworks flew and the concert reached its climax. Sulu looked at the national girl on the stage with tears in his eyes. However, he didn't know that far away, countless missiles rose into the air, just like the fireworks that filled the sky behind the stage. Chapter 404. The reason why I can't not read it is because it's very long and tiring, and it doesn't cost me any money. Wouldn't you be losing out if you don't read it? Here's the main text. Unavoidably, I, Tomcat, Lazy Cat, will recall the past, report the present, look forward to the future, and open my account book. After all, the year is almost over, and it's about to enter an even number of years. First, I'm terrified. Don't laugh in a hurry. It's not because I'm terrified of receiving your love. It's because in the blink of an eye, it's already 2001. It's making a middle-aged man like me panic. I'm turning 33. How time flies. When I wrote a nonsense serial in 2001, there was a line in it. Hong Kong only returned yesterday, so how is it that in the blink of an eye we're crossing the century? Back then, I thought that the speed of 3 years in the blink of an eye was terrifying, but now I realize that 10 years in the blink of an eye is the true tragedy. When one is about to die, one's words are true. I'm still a long way from death, but the pressure makes me want to do something. I want to write a story, and I'm writing one now. I want to make a movie, and that's nonsense. Even something like a script makes me dizzy, and I can't appreciate its beauty. I want to marry a wife, and I'm about to marry one. Yes, this is a very long story. In a few days, I'll write a short story to commemorate my long-lost single life. Speaking of which, from 2004 onwards, many reading comrades thought I was married, but in fact I wasn't. I was just booked. Digression back to the topic. How can I not be terrified? Su Sanduo said to do meaningful things, and meaningful things are to live well. Then what does it mean to live well? Then he said he was doing something meaningful, which made it a tongue twister. From my point of view, to do meaningful things you have to make living well concrete. For example, what you do for a living, what kind of happiness and satisfaction you get after living well. This is very simple. It's the sigh I've repeated countless times to everyone. Doing what you like and earning money is happiness. The second is happiness. When I started writing this year-end speech, I was worried that there wouldn't be anything to write. Of course, when I saw the long paragraph of nonsense at the beginning, I realized that I had underestimated my nagging and long-winded abilities. The reason for this worry is that I always feel that when I look back on the year, there has to be some ups and downs in this year's life. Just like what Gitch Pig said to Ing Xiu a long time ago. Or was it Zi Yuan who said it? I forgot. It was probably because when Russian did not like ping ping, something like that. A plot without highs and lows was not a good plot. A year without highs and lows was a difficult year to write a summary. The celebration ended at the beginning of the year, and he felt very happy. Now that I've started a podcast, I feel very happy. Moreover, the more I write, the happier I feel. Before this, I had already thought that this topic would definitely not be pleasing. Mecha, but in the end, there weren't many mecha fights in a million words. If it was Interstellar, I would definitely not admit it. I don't have the ability to do architecture. If it was sci-fi, you can just kill me. I only admit that Spy is a foreign land. But in fact, your divine eyes have already discovered it. What I want to write is just a story, but I can't find where to put the background, so I can only put it in a completely different world, but in essence it is exactly the same world. For this kind of irrelevant topic, I brace myself and start writing because I really like it, and I'm sure that I can fully immerse myself in it, but I've already prepared myself mentally. In the end, the response is still sloppy. There are more than 80,000 views, and it's still slowly increasing. You have to know that during the same period of the year, there probably wasn't much more. Excluding the selectivity of the topic, I find that I'm okay. It's still that old saying that isn't actually YD. I really have a long life. Although the number of friends reading this story is increasing slowly, it looks like it will also last. This brings me back to the first sigh. I'm really prepared to do this for the rest of my life, so I have to write every story full of love. I've always thought that if you're determined to do something for the rest of your life, then that's the attitude of a career. I've raised myself up again, and I'm starting to walk with a clatter. I'm an easily satisfied person. It's because of this happiness that it's hard to write a summary. My family, growth, and life since I was young were all this happy and sunny. It was a complete mess. Fate was made in heaven. Year after year, I can't find any bumps in my life. I forgot to mention that life in Mei and Qing was also very happy. This is the third summary. The change of life. Living in Qing, there are many things to do and worry about. In the past, I've mentioned this many times in my nonsense. Some of my reading friends are tired of it and think I'm being pretentious. I won't talk about it here. I just feel that when one reaches middle age, it's indeed easy to get tired. Two pairs of readers got to know each other through reading my books, and they fell in love. It's said that they're preparing to get married. This is very good. Perhaps there are other readers who have the same story, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that you can and should get married. That way, my book of achievements will forever be filled with glory. Fourth, this story. This is a good story, but there's a problem with my ability. I'm not being modest here. Everyone knows that I'm not a modest person, so I can't necessarily write it well. However, I will adhere to one principle, which is to evaluate myself. What I write every day must be worthy of the subscription price you pay. When I first started to write about Qing Union, I only knew how to clear water and not fill in the blanks. Later I realized that this was nonsense. Even if you don't want to fill in the blanks, there will still be times when you can't write and need to update. Intentionally or unintentionally, you'll still fill in the blanks. It's just that. I firmly believe that the words I fill in, which describe feelings and emotions, although pure, can be sold for a little money. This brings me to another point. I'm not being modest. Recently I've been feeling quite proud, especially in December. Other than going to Baotou halfway through, I've been messing around the rest of the time. In fact, this messing around started on the 23rd of last month. Such an intensive 3 updates a day is something that a lazy person like me has never thought of before. But what's really proud is that during the 3 updates a day, I actually didn't fill in the blanks at all. I didn't even fill in the blanks. I actually wrote better than before. This was confirmed in the emotional greetings sent by Comrade Xieyue, a female junior high school classmate of mine, and a few friends. If there's a problem with my self-perception, I think there shouldn't be too much of a problem with these guys' feelings. Does this mean that I really have potential to be tapped? I'm still young and haven't withered? 6th point, I finally started to report the accounts. Since July, I've been grateful for everyone's support and love. I promised everyone that there won't be any irresistible situation, and I'll never update again. Ru Chunxiang jumped up victoriously and screamed, "I did it! I did it! This is a very good attitude. I didn't write much. I'm indeed a lazy person, so I can only compare with myself. Fortunately, I've done what I promised you. That's enough." Speaking of this, I really want to say that I often spell in the group. I really admire the Tang family's 3rd young master. It's not his speed, but his endurance. He's a guy with a professional spirit. I really want to learn from him. December's accounts have also been cleared. There's about 10 or so days of 3 updates. That's it. Now I'll talk about the plan for next month and next year. Pay attention to it. 7th point. Looking forward to the future. To be honest, I definitely didn't write as much in January as I did this month. I'll be very busy until March and again in May. As for whether I'll be busy in between, I really don't know. I promise to keep updating. I promise that when I have time, I'll write more and write more seriously. Then this year I'll give you the story of the spy so that you can pass the time, and also pass some time. From now on, the first 7 days will be double the monthly votes. I can only do what I said before. I don't dare to promise to explode, because the invincible state won't last forever. I'm not tired, but I'm not tired either. I just need to rest. But I still need to solicit monthly votes. This is also a very important part of the plan. Everyone knows what kind of person I am. I've been performing well recently. I'm very confident that I can squeeze everything out of everyone. Back to the fifth point, I'm not modest. Many people laugh and call me narcissistic, but you and I are both wrong. I don't have low self-esteem, but my mood is easily affected. It's easy for me to think that I'm a scumbag after introspection, so I need to constantly encourage myself to maintain some kind of confidence and drive. So I really need your encouragement. Recommendation votes are good. Subscriptions are even better. Monthly votes are the best. Yes, the purpose of this year's summary is to encourage myself. And I hope that the comrades reading this story will also encourage themselves. I discovered that in order to live a good life in this society that isn't absolutely perfect, this technique is extremely useful. What kind of person am I? I'm a great and hard-working fat man. Seeing that this annual summary is close to 3,000 words, sincere and full of literary talent, how can I not vote for the monthly votes? The first part of the summary was written very smoothly, but the last part about soliciting votes wasn't. Actually, the last part of the solicitation was just because I was a little unconvinced. I don't believe that soliciting votes has to be hot-blooded enough and have to be updated enough. I just haven't updated enough. I probably won't be hot-blooded for the rest of my life, but I'll pull a lot of monthly votes to see. TSK. I'm that kind of person who doesn't walk the normal path. Waha, I wish everyone a happy new year, healthy parents, and a happy life. I definitely don't have the energy to write more New Year's greetings. Chapter 405. I'm Jian as in simple so-and-so. Sulu stood in the shadows at the side of the stage, vigilantly watching his surroundings while listening to the 7 groups of reports from his headphones. His eyes were fixed on the graceful and charming girl on the stage, and his mood was gently swaying along with the lyrics that came out of her red lips. The simple so-and-so referred to Jian or Jianshuer. The simple lyrics were written by her personally. Although it seemed a little long and complicated, everyone knew that those lyrics were talking about her life, the bizarre 19 years of life of a national idol. Especially for Sulu, whether it was the assassination in Linhai or the terrorist attack on the concert in Huangshan 4 states, even if he was not directly involved, he was deeply involved in these things, so he felt it more deeply. Jian Shuer sang this song on the stage for the first time. Sulu looked at her quietly, thinking about the years that had passed. Only then did he realize that a girl's voice could be so low and fluctuating, and in the end, there was a trace of honesty and stubbornness. Thinking silently, the music gradually faded, the lights dimmed, and several military singers went on stage to perform. After the last break, Sulu plugged in his headphones, hurriedly walked backstage to the electric downstairs, and held Jian Shuer's hand as they walked to the dressing room. The backstage of the concert was like a war. Half a minute later, Jian Shuer came out of the changing room. Sulu, the only male in the room, couldn't help but stiffen slightly. His mouth was half open, and he was almost unable to speak because of that beautiful light. The last 3 songs of the concert were dynamic dance songs. Jian Shuer was wearing a very cool costume, unprecedentedly cool. The girl's purple hair was combed as smooth as a ray of light, and then tied up with a thin red ribbon, very eye-catching. The most important thing was that she was only wearing a very tight strapless dress with a white broadband belt around her waist. Her beautiful shoulders were exposed, and the close-fitting cut of the dress highlighted the girl's curves. And because of the low-cut design, one could even see the charming shadow between the 2 soft lumps of flesh. Jian Shuer was also very not used to this costume. With a trace of shyness, she covered her chest with her right hand, stuck out her tongue and said, "It's the first time I've dressed like this." With this small movement, the girl's playful and youthful sexiness gushed out of her body. Sulu was a little embarrassed and lowered his head, only to find that the soft and tight red skirt was surprisingly short, revealing her slender legs. Sulu was silent, thinking that if she went on stage and danced like this, wouldn't the soldiers see everything? Jian Shuer had always appeared in public with a healthy, fresh, and cute image. Now that Sulu knew her family background, he naturally knew that this national girl didn't need to show her beautiful body, and probably no one would dare ask her to do so. It's hard to imagine what those soldiers will do when they return to camp tonight. Maybe it was because of the contrast between the noisy backstage and the quiet here. Or maybe it was because the girl in front of him was charming and sexy enough to turn everyone upside down, which made Sulu a little awkward. He actually said what was in his mind. He just didn't say that if the girl went on stage like this and exposed her body freely, it would definitely make countless people fantasize. This costume was not prepared by the performance team in advance, but by Jian Shuier after they went to the hospital and the cemetery that day. The girl bravely put down her right hand that was covering her body. Her cheeks were a little hot, and she opened her big eyes and said to Sulu, "For the Federation, they stayed on this faraway planet for 2 years. You know, some of them are younger than me, maybe they haven't been in love before, they will die." Jian Shuier took a deep breath, and her short red skirt fluttered gently. She narrowed her eyes and said cutely, "If that's the case, isn't it good to make them happy?" This beautiful and moving national girl was undoubtedly the most lustful object in the Federation. Wearing the poster of the warship's military officer uniform, who knew how many otakus and uncles would accompany her in the middle of the night when they were lonely? Not to mention she was dressed so charmingly today, just like a little fairy. In fact, Sulu was also one of these people, so right now his face was a little hot. Sulu said to make them fantasize, and Jian Shuier said with her big eyes, "For the Federation, they stayed on this planet for 2 years, maybe they will die. These young people probably haven't even been in love before, so what's there to be afraid of? I don't even care if they lick me." Sulu blushed, thinking that she seemed to have done it before. In the strong rhythm of the dance music, accompanied by many dance groups, Jian Shuier appeared in the center of the stage in an unprecedentedly cool outfit. She held the standing microphone tightly with both hands, and her eyes were as clear as autumn water. She looked at the night sky and sang, and then she began to gently twist her body to the rhythm. Her movements were very smooth and seductive, but it had the unique innocence of a young girl. Regardless of whether it was her moving eyebrows or the slight movement of her waist, she did not deliberately reveal a trace of seductive gaze or body language. However, the young girl's peerlessly beautiful and inviolable face, coupled with the skin-tight short skirt that could kill eyeballs, the tens of thousands of Federation soldiers on the stage were first stunned, and then they were silent, and then a loud echo suddenly broke out. In the previous concert, most of the applause and cheers were heard, but now it turned into excited whistles. Sulu nervously watched her on the stage. That red miniskirt was made of extremely thin material, and it was extremely tight-fitting, making the girl's tight and enchanting legs look extremely seductive. The designer was not satisfied, and actually made a slit on both sides of the miniskirt. As the girl gently twisted, the dazzling spring scenery inside the miniskirt was faintly discernible. The whistles under the stage became crazier and crazier. The members of Group 7, who were responsible for the security work, were dumbfounded. The people of the performance team and the broadcasting team looked at the national girl on the stage who they had never known before, and were completely shocked. Suli's mouth was dry. He really wanted to take off his black formal suit, rush to the stage and tie it around her waist. However, what she said before had touched him. Just listening to the crazy reaction of the soldiers under the stage, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Was this to rally the soldiers' hearts or to shake the soldiers' hearts? The youthful and playful little sex appeal on the stage was played to the extreme in the last song. When Jian Shuier, who changed into a dark Federation female officer uniform, appeared on the stage again, the little sex appeal had completely become a divine artifact that catalyzed male hormones. Everyone in the Federation saw her appear on the screen in this battleship commander uniform when she was 14 years old. This represented the collective memory of a generation. Today, the short skirt of the captain's military uniform was cut to its shortest length, and the top 2 buttons were undone. Only a military officer's scarf was casually draped over her fair skin. Her slightly messy purple hair was stuck to her moving cheeks because of the fragrant perspiration that seeped out from her perspiration. Still inexperienced, still shy, Jian Shuier forced herself to calmly release all the charm of a female captain. It turned out that this was the final climax of the concert. Sulu stared at this scene in a daze. He didn't notice that the thousands of fireworks behind the concert were once again lit up, and the pillars of light that created the crazy atmosphere began to sweep again. Countless fireworks exploded on the strategic boundary line between the north and south of Planet 5460. The electric control network on the front line of the Federation had been monitoring the missile base of the Empire, but the first to launch an attack in the dark was not the missile force of the Empire, but the 17 Empire armored regiments with the momentum of tigers and wolves. Armored vehicles and self-propelled heavy cannons poured ammunition without any regard for the cost. The dense and terrifying roar was absolutely not one after another, because there was absolutely no moment of interruption in the middle. The front line, which had been quiet for a long time, was like a hurricane. Once it landed, it began to show its terrifying power. On the boundary line between the north and south that stretched for 3,000 kilometers, countless clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. Before they could disperse, they were shattered by the second wave of attacks. The loud explosions and blinding flashes were like fireworks in a concert, illuminating the entire sky. The high-speed Empire armored regiments and the even faster mecha squads shot out a soul-devouring and life-reaping rain of bullets from their cannons, madly sweeping the Federation's defense line. It was just that the light beams couldn't kill people, but the rain of bullets from the Imperial Expeditionary Force continued to destroy the Federation's defense line, reaping the lives of the Federation's soldiers. At the end of the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, Jian Shuier held a concert on Planet 5460 called Victory. The Imperial Expeditionary Force suddenly launched an all-out attack, charging towards the south with an indomitable momentum and terrifying firepower. It was as if they turned into 17 unstoppable sharp knives, stabbing straight towards the southern hemisphere. This planet, which hadn't had a large-scale war for a long time, finally began to tremble. The attack of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was like a hurricane. The moment it landed, it began to show its powerful destructive power without any hesitation. The Third War between the Federation and the Empire officially began because of a concert. The location of the Victory concert was in the Southern Hemisphere Federation's headquarters, which was still a long distance away from the location where the Imperial Expeditionary Force launched their attack. However, as soon as the concert ended, an ear-piercing air defense siren filled the sky. The soldiers, who were still immersed in the impact of Jian Shuiyer's uniform, suddenly had a serious expression on their faces. They woke up from their crazy emotions and quickly began to return to the camp, preparing for battle. The Federation's television station immediately cut off the broadcast signal, and Jian Shuier, who had just walked off the stage, was surrounded by 7 groups of armed personnel, beginning to prepare to evacuate. Unlike the soldiers, most of the people in this team were civilians. Hearing the ear-piercing siren, they were naturally terrified. An officer quickly arranged the evacuation matters while comforting everyone. The first wave of medium-range missiles launched by the Empire has been intercepted by the Weigua system. The military fleet has been dispatched. Please don't panic. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, a major general, walked over with a serious face, handed over an electronic document, and said, "This is the secret mission given to you by the Ministry of National Defense." Su Li's heart sank slightly. He knew that things had finally come. Chapter 406. Sulu looked at the top-secret military electronic order and narrowed his eyes. All the questions he had after receiving the mission from the headquarters of Whitewater Company a few months ago were partially answered by this document. Since the Victory concert was a small part of this large-scale military operation, it made sense for him and Group 7 to be in charge of security. Therefore, he didn't ask any boring questions like whether or not he could accept the mission. Instead, he asked the Major General, "We only need to send Jian Shuier to the warship, and the mission is considered over?" The Federation's Major General couldn't be young. A Major General under 40 like Du Shaoqing was extremely rare. The Major General in front of him was around 50 years old. His expression was cold, and he wasn't very polite to Su Lu. He said in a deep voice, "What you need to do now is to execute, not ask. The headquarters will send a reinforced battalion to escort you to Zhou Airport. You need to leave immediately. Sulu nodded silently and looked around. Although the headquarters couldn't hear the explosions at the front line, they could faintly smell the smoke and feel the pressure of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's large-scale attack. The members of Group 7 were already prepared to depart. Jian Shuai's team was also waiting to depart. In this tense moment, everyone's movements seemed to be countless times faster than usual. After all, if they stayed here any longer, no one knew if a missile would fall on their heads in the next second. The general said in a deep voice, "Let's go. I will personally accompany you." Sulu knew Jian Shuai's identity, so he was not surprised by the Major General's words. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the figures around him in the dark. After confirming that the military had sent an entire mechanical division to protect them, he was slightly relieved. He turned around and held Jian Shuai's hand, and quickly walked to the black car. After getting into the car, he turned on the car's radar and main control system as fast as he could. At the same time, he put on his sunglasses and said in his mind, "Old man, watch the road for me." After getting in touch with the Federal Central Computer, Su Li's mood became calmer. He didn't see the impending crisis as terrifying. Accompanied by pungent exhaust fumes, a fleet of military vehicles using compound power roared out of the base camp in the dark night and quickly advanced toward the Zuchio spaceport in the southwest direction. A light battleship of the Federation was already ready to take off there, waiting to escort Jian Shuai and her team away from this terrifying planet that was already covered in a sea of fire and craggy stars. Sulu controlled the steering wheel and drove the black car, leading his subordinates' motorcade. Under the protection of an entire battalion, they quickly advanced along the road. The temperature in the car had not immediately risen. Through the rear-view hologram, he looked at the girl curled up in the chair behind him. He neatly took off his black summer coat and threw it over, saying, "Wear this, don't catch a cold." Jian Shuai, who didn't have time to change her clothes, was still wearing the extremely short and cool captain's uniform. She didn't know if it was because of the cold, or because she was frightened, or because she still hadn't shaken off the mood of the concert, but her cheeks and ears were slightly red. She took the coat that had Su Li's scent and silently put it on. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack was extremely fierce. The motorcade that was preparing to leave the planet was silent. Only the car's communication system rang from time to time with the command center's battle situation through the surface radio. Although the Imperial Army's speed was fast, under the resistance of the Federation's defense line, there was no way to stop the motorcade's advance. Through the old man, Sulu had learned about the specifics of the battle earlier than anyone else in the convoy. He narrowed his eyes and silently looked at the military vehicles and the soldiers in the vehicles. He suddenly confirmed one thing: the target of the Empire's people should be the girl behind him. 30 kilometers away from Zuchio Airport, there was a branch intersection. There was still silence in the black car, but Su Li's face suddenly became extremely ugly. "What's wrong?" Jian Shuai had been carefully observing his expression and asked softly. Sulu didn't answer. What answered Jian Shuai was the military's urgent notification in the system. Zuchio Airport was raided by the Empire's fleet. The warships were seriously damaged and unable to take off. The landing platforms were completely destroyed. The battle damage is being assessed. In the dark night, the long motorcade stopped because of this unexpected situation. After 2 seconds of absolute silence, the Major General's cold and unquestionable voice came from the system. "According to the backup plan, the motorcade will turn to Luoqiu Airport." Most of the vehicles in the motorcade began to roar again, preparing to turn to the right side. However, the 7 military vehicles of the 7th group were like silent stones, stopping on the right side of the road. They didn't have the intention to set off, because the black car had been silent and still. The Major General's angry voice sounded. "Lieutenant Colonel Su, why don't you start immediately?" Sulu held the steering wheel with both hands and narrowed his eyes. He looked at the determined but still young faces of the soldiers in the military vehicles in front of him and suddenly asked, "You know you are bait?" He didn't use the communication system, so this sentence was naturally directed to Jian Shuai. The girl tightened the clothes on her body as if she was a little afraid of the cold, and gently nodded. Sulu was silent for a few seconds, pressed the earpiece in his ear and said to everyone, "I have a different opinion." The north-south boundary of Planet 5460 was not the actual defense line. Between the defense positions of the Federation and the Empire, there was a buffer zone of about 120 kilometers wide. Therefore, when the Imperial Expeditionary Force fiercely advanced southward, the plains and hills in front of them did not suffer any powerful counterattacks at all. The Imperial Expeditionary Force with the black hibiscus flying military flag was like countless vicious beasts that had been hungry and thirsty for many years. They greedily and stubbornly pounced toward the water source. The mixed brigade of heavy armor and Moon Wolf mecha turned into a black torrent, coldly but fanatically crushing line after line of defense. Accompanied by flames that soared into the sky and destruction all over the ground, they continued southward, and continued southward. The federal military had long been mentally prepared for the surprise attack of the Imperium's Expeditionary Army. However, they still did not expect that the Imperium's Expeditionary Army would actually launch an attack with all its members. This was definitely not a surprise attack, but a full-scale push that was close to staking everything on a single throw. He Zi was a company commander of the Xiaji Mountain Defense Position. Covered in dust, he pushed away the corpses of his orderlies in front of him and shouted into the communication device with a hoarse voice, "We need backup, we need backup." His orderlies died in the previous intensive airstrikes of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, and the microdrones of the Empire buzzing above his head were like troublesome locusts, constantly interfering with the Federal Army's wireless communication. The ground began to shake. He Zi's eyes were red as he looked at the countless armored vehicles that appeared on the hill. He helplessly put down the communication device in his hand, and then a fierce expression appeared on his face. He walked in front of the main cannon of the Gongzi and said to the cannoneer in a deep voice, "The mecha reinforcements are still 12 kilometers away, now it's up to you." From the company commander to the normal soldiers, looking at the Empire's armored vehicles and the ferocious black mechas that covered the hill, they already knew that they could not hold this line of defense, but they did not have the slightest bit of fear in their hearts. Even if they did not show it on their angry and twisted faces. The Gongzi's main cannon under the control of the company's cannoneer team shook violently, and beautiful cannon fire spewed out in a straight line. With a loud boom, one of the Empire's armored vehicles exploded into pieces under the unstoppable attack. Meanwhile, the armored vehicle behind it was also flipped over by this blast and fell heavily to the ground, almost smashing into a Moon Wolf mecha with a ghostly figure, turning it into several tons of black dirt. Electronic interference, virtual bait, dazzling artillery fire, high-speed chariots, and strange mechas formed a thrilling scene in this valley. A black shadow flashed past, and the heavy Moon Wolf mecha successfully avoided the cannon fire of the Federation's position and rushed up the hill. Company Commander He Zi hugged the heavy carbine machine and shouted as he pulled the trigger on the mecha that was close to him. Beautiful bullets spewed out, and countless dull sounds of metal splashing rang out. However, it was all in vain. The Empire's Moon Wolf mecha stepped heavily on his body, and at the same time, its right mechanical arm stabbed out with an alloy blade, ruthlessly stabbing into the weakest part of the Gongzi's main cannon. Under the heavy and huge mecha, the dull sound of heavy machinery still rang out, but after a short moment it abruptly stopped. The Black Moon Wolf mecha did not stop at all, and continued to move silently towards the south where there were still scattered resistance. Behind it, the Empire's armored soldiers surged past, leaving behind countless ruins and corpses all over the ground. Countless similar scenes played out in the valley and plains of this planet. The bloody and cruel war did not give people the time to reflect on its characteristics, and it had already brought death and defeat. The Federation's headquarters located in the base was busy, whether it was the lieutenant commander or the officers who were monitoring the movements of the Imperial Expeditionary Force through the electronic monitoring network, sending specific battlefield data to the various troops. Their expressions were exceptionally heavy and ugly. Since yesterday, the Federation's planetary headquarters had raised the defense level of the frontline to the highest level. The highest-ranking officers had long guessed the Imperial Expeditionary Force's plan, but who would have thought that, under the premise of sufficient preparation, the Imperial Expeditionary Force would still advance so fiercely and so quickly? Are the people of the Empire crazy? They actually took out all of their assets. What is Umburi planning? The Federation's frontline commander, Lieutenant General Nelson, looked at the battle situation screen with a pale face, looking at the direction of the light that made him feel endless anger and humiliation, and he slammed the table heavily and shouted, "Inform Hong Yujing to immediately suppress the defense line behind Mount Xiaji. We must not let the enemy break through. Commander, the fleet must first ensure the safety of the spaceport," a staff officer reminded him worriedly. "I understand," Lieutenant General Nelson slowly calmed down and said, "but she will also understand." The federal military had always thought that the military leader of the Imperial Expeditionary Force in the North, Old General Umburi, was only using this seemingly exaggerated full-scale attack to cover up a certain 1,000-mile surprise attack that they were determined to win. However, the reality was not so. The Imperial general with deep military wisdom, after accepting the Emperor's random order, actually found a way out of the impossible. He used a full-scale attack to cover up the 1,000-mile surprise attack, but wasn't he also using that surprise attack to cover up this decisive and terrifying full-scale attack? The Federal Army was very likely to fall into a situation where they could only focus on one thing and lose the other. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.